Chapter 1556. Li Qingshan was blown away from the Hell Realm by the gale, and his state immediately started to regress. The neither thought nor no thought tranquility collapsed in an instant, followed by the nothing tranquility, the boundless tranquility of consciousness, the boundless tranquility of emptiness. It was as if he had fallen from a high altitude and lost his balance. He forgot the meaning of emptiness as form, and only some remnant thoughts were left. He exhausted all of his spirit, and his consciousness was in a mess. He couldn't even maintain the most basic thoughts. In a trance, he felt himself lying on the moist ground, and the sound of running water rang in his ears. The sunlight shone through the gaps of the leaves. Everything that happened in the Hell Realm, and even the colorless realm, was like a dream. The pain and realization, the torture and revenge, all seemed extremely unreal. When his thoughts gradually recovered, he had the first thought: where am I? His whole body was numb from the gale, and he couldn't even move a finger. He tried his best to turn his head and observe the surroundings. The sun was bright, the waves were sparkling, and the grass was green. It was a scene of spring. This river bank was a common scene in his youth, and he had never felt so intimate and pleasant. I should have been sent back to the human realm. Sigh, if you don't go to hell, you won't know the benefits of the human realm. Since he couldn't move, he closed his eyes to rest. At this moment there was a sound in the forest. Li Qingshan opened his eyes again, and turned his head to look. A big brown bear peeked its head out of the dense forest. I won't be eaten by a bear, right? Sigh, what am I thinking? I'm not made of flesh and blood. But then again, would a bear eat someone who pretended to be dead? Just as he was letting his thoughts run wild, the big brown bear completely walked out of the forest and stood straight in front of him. A man's face was revealed under the bear's head, and it turned out to be a man wearing a bear's skin. Li Qingshan couldn't help but laugh. The man also laughed and said with a strange accent, I thought it was prey, so it's a man. Li Qingshan saw the bow and arrows in his hand, and the quiver on his waist. He must be a hunter in the mountains. However, the painted face looked very heroic and fierce. It left a deep impression, and he must be a tyrannical person who could do whatever he wanted in the mountains. Li Qingshan tried his best to move his tongue and said vaguely, Brother, do you have wine? The man was stunned. He touched the wineskin on his waist and asked, How did you know I had wine? Li Qingshan licked his lips and smiled. You don't look like someone who drinks water. Ha, I always drink wine like water. The man took out the wine bag and gulped it down. The fragrance of the wine overflowed. Li Qingshan was envious. He hurriedly said, Don't finish it, leave a few mouthfuls for me. He had never missed the taste of fine wine so much. The man looked him up and down. How do you drink it? Li Qingshan opened his mouth wide and nodded vigorously. Ah! The man didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He turned his wineskin, and a stream of sparkling wine fell into Li Qingshan's mouth. Li Qingshan's eyes suddenly widened. He had never tasted such delicious wine before. Even the legendary bejeweled nectar was nothing more than this. Sigh, the colorless realm was too torturous. Just thinking about it made him feel pity. The man ignored Li Qingshan's pleading gaze. He decisively put away the wineskin. Little brother, where are you from? Why are you lying here? Li Qingshan smacked his lips. Bro, give me a few more mouthfuls. Don't be so stingy. I don't lack money. The man laughed. Don't be discontented. I also have to leave a few mouthfuls. Li Qingshan helplessly said, All right. I was blown here by the wind. The wine entered his stomach and turned into a warm current. His whole body felt warm, dispelling the numbness. He felt strong again. He crawled up on his hands and feet. What is this place? The man laughed. Nonsense. How can there be such a strong wind in the world? It can even blow a person of your age up. Li Qingshan moved his limbs. Heh, not to mention a person of my age. Even the 3 mountains and 5 sacred mountains can be blown up. Ha, you really know how to brag. Li Qingshan chuckled. Of course I can brag too. He didn't try to argue and only said, Thank you for your wine. What are you hunting? The man suddenly knocked an arrow on his bow and pointed it at Li Qingshan's nose. Bull hunting. Li Qingshan's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help but take a step back. He was actually a little scared. The man put away his bow and arrow. It's a pity that there are fewer and fewer bulls. Instead, there are more and more people who brag. Li Qingshan let out a sigh of relief. That chill disappeared. He laughed at himself. His realm had suddenly regressed. Even his courage had shrunk. You're alone? No, I have a tribe. Li Qingshan joked. Oh, you're even a leader. The man raised his arms and opened his chest. He laughed brightly. I'm also a witch. Li Qingshan found it interesting. Your tribe must be very big. The man said proudly. Big. It's extremely big. Wherever the sun shines, it's my land. He inadvertently revealed a trace of domineering aura. Li Qingshan was shocked. He came back to his senses and laughed in his heart. What an arrogant and overbearing village chief. Where the sun shines. Do you think you're a lion king? The man suddenly said to Li Qingshan. How about it, little brother? Join my tribe. I'll give you all the land under the sun. You'll have endless wine and beauties. You won't have to worry about being blown around by the wind. Li Qingshan's eyes were full of smiles. Don't tell me you're going to take over this fish pond. Brother, if you give me all the land under the sun, where are you going to put you, the leader? The man pointed upwards. The sky belongs to me. That's reasonable. Pfft. Li Qingshan finally couldn't help but laugh. You said I'm bragging. You're practically bragging until the sky breaks. The man only smiled. Li Qingshan finally stopped laughing. All right, I'll join. The man nodded slightly. He had the demeanor of a king. It was as if he wasn't the leader of the tribe, but the lord of the sky. Li Qingshan raised his right hand. Reporting to the leader, I want a drink. The man took off the wine bag and threw it to him. He picked it up and gulped it down. After gulping it down, he let out a long breath. Good wine. His face was red. He felt energetic and full of strength. A strong sense of drunkenness rushed to his head. He raised his right hand again. Reporting to the leader, I strongly request to be the leader. The man smiled and shook his head. That won't do. Only the strongest person can be the leader. You're still far from it. Haha, don't say any more. Li Qingshan held his stomach and rolled on the ground laughing. He immediately wanted to show the power of the man deity, as the descendant of the sky devil. He wanted to let this overbearing village chief broaden his horizons. But after thinking about it, he felt that it was unnecessary. After all, the man invited him to drink with good intentions. There was no need to scare him. All right, you're the leader. Whatever you say. But I'm leaving. Since his strength had recovered, it was time for him to move forward. There are many tigers and wolves in the mountain. Take this to protect yourself. The man didn't ask him to stay. He threw another item. Li Qingshan caught it. It was an ancient bronze sword. When he pulled it out of the sheath, there was no coldness or sharpness. The blade was not even drawn. One side of the sword was engraved with the sun, moon, and stars. The other side was engraved with mountains, rivers, and trees. Other than that, it was ordinary. He casually threw it back. No need. I use a knife. This is a keepsake and also a reward. The man said in a deep voice. In an instant, there was a sense that he couldn't refuse. All right. Thank you, leader. Li Qingshan casually cupped his hands. Suddenly he flew into the sky. He turned back and asked with a smile. Leader, what's the name of our tribe? The man smiled as usual. Yoxiong. Chapter 1557. There's a bear. Li Qingshan suddenly woke up and sat up. He found himself lying on the wet ground, and beside him was a sparkling river. The wind blew past the treetops, and the treetops danced in the wind. The mountain was empty, and the spring was beautiful. The forest was fresh, and the air was filled with the fragrance of grass and soil. Is this a dream? His right hand touched something. It was the ancient bronze sword, and he couldn't help but widen his eyes. He touched his chest again, and the wine bag was already warm. He looked back, and there was no sign of a bear in the forest. The atmosphere in this quiet forest suddenly became strange. As the descendant of the sky demon, he was the ancestor of playing with people's hearts, who could easily give him a dream and make him believe it was real. At least, it was not something an ordinary hunter could do, and this wine and sword were both very unusual. He pulled out the wine stopper and sniffed it. A gush of spiritual chi rushed into his head, and his primordial spirit was cleansed. Where the wine was dense, the surrounding plants grew wildly and gradually gained spirituality, turning into spiritual herbs. The fish in the river flipped, and at a speed visible to the naked eye, the layers of black scales on their bodies shone with golden light. In an instant, they became spiritual monsters. He quickly stuffed the wine bag back and looked around in surprise. Although he didn't know anything about feng shui, after becoming a human immortal, there were many things that he could feel without understanding. The feng shui of this forest had changed. He had eaten many elixirs in his life, but they couldn't be compared to this wine. And this was obviously not an ordinary wine bag, but a sumeru ring. The amount of wine stored was immeasurable. Although it was a gift from someone else, it was really too rare. It made him feel a little guilty. He stood up, waved away the carp monsters and catfish monsters, and held the ancient bronze sword tightly. With a clang, he pulled the sword out of the sheath and raised it towards the sun. The sword had the sun, moon, and stars. The mountains, rivers, and plants were all vivid in his eyes, but he still couldn't see anything special. And this was strange in itself. Not to mention an ordinary bronze sword, it was a powerful treasure. In the eyes of a human immortal like him, he could see how the runes were carved and how the formation worked. In other words, he, a human immortal, was not qualified to hold this ancient sword. He couldn't even understand it. With a thought, he summoned a gust of cool wind and wrapped it around his body. This was the trade wind that the great sage of ventilation had given him. It contained all the information he had comprehended in the colorless realm. It wasn't wind in the ordinary sense, but the materialization of a certain law. This law allowed great sage Yuan Feng to ignore the barriers of the universe and obtain all information. It wasn't just the information that was expressed and recorded, regardless of whether it was a plot in a secret room or a scheme in the depths of one's heart. All of it could be turned into trade winds. For him to see, for him to hear. That was why he was called the great sage of ventilation. To this macaque king, there were no secrets in the world. In other words, any profound cultivation method or profound comprehension would be obtained by him and used by him. He was the embodiment of nomological laws. Li Qingshan obtaining this wisp of trade wind was equivalent to obtaining the help of this nomological law. He did not need to go through a long period of cultivation and difficult thinking. He could directly reach the highest realm of the 4 dhyanas and 8 samadhi, which was equivalent to taking an exam with the answer. Of course, his current strength was not enough to support such a realm, but as long as there was this wisp of trade wind, he could use it as a reference at any time. Moreover, they could come and go at his beck and call. There was no end to it. There was no end to it. This continued until he completely returned to the highest realm of neither thought nor no thought. Of course, that was not something that a human immortal could support. In other words, before he became a true immortal, there would be no so-called bottlenecks. If I meet a few more great sages, just give me some benefits, and I will immediately have multiple nomological laws protecting my body. It can be said that borrowing the power of heaven and earth when the time comes. How difficult would it be to become a true immortal? Thinking of this, he took a deep sip of wine. Spiritual energy washed through his primordial spirit, and his strength also increased. He immediately absorbed a wisp of trade wind, and this strength quickly weakened. His realm immediately began to rise. In his eyes, the ancient greenish-bronze sword gradually changed. The mountains, rivers, grass, and trees, from a simple engraved image, gradually became deep, and his mind was completely sucked in. In the blink of an eye, he passed through thousands of mountains and valleys, the sea of snow. On the vast land, the sun, moon, and stars hung high in the sky. Day and night rotated, and the stars moved, displaying the most amazing law. The 3,000 worlds, the 6 paths of reincarnation, were all within. Everything could not be described with words. The human language was so shallow, and it was not enough to describe this grand world. In the blink of an eye, his strength was exhausted. Li Qingshan fell on his back, and the ancient greenish-bronze sword returned to its ordinary appearance. He was still holding the hilt tightly, and his whole body was trembling. All the divine weapons and rare treasures that he had seen and used in his life were like scrap metal compared to this sword. This was not an exaggeration, but a barely stated fact. In fact, such a comparison was already a disgrace to this sword. If there was a sword spirit or a sword soul, it might kill him with one strike. Although it was impossible for a sword soul to exist, even if there was one, it would be an existence similar to the world's will. And it existed in the entire 6 paths of reincarnation and the 3,000 worlds. He swung the sword, and the stars moved. I want to use a sword. Li Qingshan was extremely excited. I want to use a sword. Such a fortuitous encounter was no longer just a smoke coming out of the ancestral grave, but a fire in the ancestral grave. No, an explosion in the ancestral grave. The 18 generations of ancestors all jumped out to congratulate him. It's so cool to join the Yuxiong tribe. But as his excitement gradually calmed down, he became even more confused. What was the background of the man in the bear skin? Why did he bestow this boundless land to him? Was he joking or serious? It was more and more difficult to understand. Li Qingshan never liked to be confused. Anyway, it was not a bad thing to become stronger. He put away the wine pouch and the ancient sword and bowed to the sky. Chief, no matter what your purpose is, I thank you for the wine and the sword. But, he changed the topic and smiled. When I become strong enough, I still want to be the chief. Above the 9th heaven, the man's bare skin fell off, revealing a green dragon robe. The crown was swaying, and he nodded with a smile. I'll wait for that day. A dragon head poked out of the sea of clouds and asked, why not kill him to get rid of future troubles? Do you feel threatened? After all, I'm the one he chose. Alas, if you didn't kill his daughter, he would probably have already bowed to me. The giant dragon closed its eyes. That was just an accident. There are no accidents in the world. The giant dragon was speechless. The man patted the dragon's head and said gently, you know, I've never blamed you. But don't do anything behind my back, or I'll chop off your head. The sky darkened, the sea of clouds surged, and the stars dimmed. Only the man's figure was high up in the sky, and his eyes were empty like the sky. The sky was murderous, and the stars moved. As you wish. Chapter 1558. Broadcast. Pay attention to Qidian and get the first-hand news of the 515 red packet. Students who haven't grabbed a red packet since the new year can now show their skills. The man on the dragon's back looked back and saw through the heavens. Between the crisscrossing laws, the 6 paths slowly reincarnated, forming a multidimensional world in a form that ordinary people could not imagine or even understand. 3,000 worlds, billions of lives were all in it. Who once said that Qingzhou was 30,000 miles long, and Jianghu was only a corner? If Jianghu still existed, it was just a grain of sand among the heavens and the 10,000 worlds. When the frog at the bottom of the well painstakingly climbed out of the well along the smooth wall, and finally saw the boundless starry sky, who would have known that what it had yearned for was just a small circular sky? What it had chased after was just the only star. As shallow as it was, it once mistakenly thought that it was the shape of the whole sky, and that there was only one star. Now it no longer knew the shape of the sky, and in the endless sea of stars, it could no longer find the star that belonged to it. Suddenly, it understood that the only thing that belonged to it was that old well. The way of the human world, far away in the sea in the dark. Li Qingshan emerged from the deep sea, stretched his limbs, and lay quietly on the water, staring at the dark blue circle, which was dotted with a few flashes of light. It looks like a well. But what is well? What is that sparkling thing? Where am I? Who am I? A series of questions all puzzled. Even though he had read every book in the world, in the end, he still knew nothing. At this time, a white figure suddenly appeared. The moment she saw him, she was stunned, biting her lips, and her eyelashes fluttered. He smiled. Little N, I'm back. By the way, what's my name? Little N suddenly threw herself into his arms, and waves of water rippled silently. He gently stroked her seaweed-like long hair. He felt a burst of moisture on the side of his face. Hey, why are you crying? I'm back now, aren't I? Little N asked in a hoarse voice. Who are you? I am. I asked you first. Little N raised her head, looked at him with red eyes, and asked almost interrogatively, Who are you? The sound reverberated across the water. Speechless, he scratched his head. All right, I can't remember. I've forgotten many things. Your name is Li Qingshan. Little An repeated. Your name is Li Qingshan. That's a good name. Li Qingshan nodded with satisfaction. As expected of the name I gave it. Little An, on the other hand, burst into tears. Hey, don't cry. Li Qingshan hurriedly wiped her tears, but the more he wiped, the more tears there were. Strange, in his memory, she clearly didn't like to cry so much. Or did he forget something? Little An suddenly said, Qingshan, can we return to the 5 continents world? Li Qingshan stopped what he was doing. Little An lamented, if I forget everything, even if I become stronger, what's the use? Li Qingshan fell silent and looked up again. The dark circle flickered with a few unknown lights, distant and dim, making people feel lonely, as if they were drifting in the deep sea. But for some reason, he couldn't forget about it. That's right, he had forgotten everything except for this person, and this matter. He lowered his head, and looked at her sparkling eyes. So kind. So warm. At this moment, all his perseverance collapsed. As long as she could smile, he was willing to light all the fires in the world and never look up again. He smiled gently. All right, don't cry. Don't cry. If this is your wish. He closed his eyes and furrowed his brows, then opened them again. Then we'll. No. Little An seemed surprised. She suddenly covered his mouth and slowly shook her head. She smiled. My wish is to always be with you, no matter where we go, until death do us part. Li Qingshan suddenly felt a lump in his throat. His heart was touched, and he couldn't help but shed tears. The lone star in the sky stared at the 2 people, who were tightly hugging each other on the water surface. Who knew how much the frog in the well wanted to return to the well in the face of the boundless starry sky? This kid lost his memory. What an old-fashioned plot. No wonder he's a novelist. Gu Yinying stood elegantly in front of Li Qingshan, as if she was facing a silly kid. She even waved her hand in front of his eyes and joked. Do you still remember me? You used to like me. Luo Ho Xiaoming's heart moved, but he didn't show it. He patted Li Qingshan's shoulder. Little Li, I'm your big brother Luo Xiaoming. Big father, you still can't let go of your obsession. Li Fengyuan sat cross-legged, wearing a pillow crown and a red kasaya. He put his hands together and sighed and shook his head. Li Qingshan looked at Gu Yinying, and his eyes lit up. A woman with fish lips. Gu Yinying narrowed her eyes, and her sharp gaze pointed straight at Little An beside Li Qingshan. Little An was unmoved, and he even nodded. Yes, that's right. It had been a while since Li Qingshan returned, and Little An had told him everything that had happened in detail. Coupled with the spirit turtle's powerful deduction ability, he was finally no longer ignorant. Although he couldn't say that he recovered his memory, he at least knew what had happened. However, Teacher Little An seemed to have mixed some personal information in his lessons. Gu Yinying broke into laughter. She retracted her gaze and introduced herself. I'm Gu Yinying. Losing my memory isn't necessarily a bad thing. Yinying, please be my woman. Gu Yinying's smile did not change. I take back what I said. Li Qingshan snickered and glanced at Luo Ho Xiaoming. Come on, Xiaoming. Xiaoming for a day, Xiaoming for life. Even if you become a god in the future, you'll still be called Xiaoming. You're my big brother. I'm your grandpa. The veins on Luo Ho Xiaoming's forehead bulged. If it weren't for the fact that you're not in your best condition, I'd fight you right now. For the past few years, he had been constantly fighting in the Azura realm, and his strength recovered extremely quickly. He had already gone through 6 heavenly tribulations, surpassing Li Qingshan. It was only a matter of time before he regained his godhood. Fight me? Ha ha ha. Li Qingshan laughed. You think you're not you just because you've gone through 6 heavenly tribulations? He casually took out the 3 mountains, and played with them like he was playing with a walnut. Luo Ho Xiaoming's eyes narrowed. He knew what was good for him. He could tell how powerful the 3 mountains were, and he might not be able to withstand them. You've seen that one. Indeed. Great. Luo Ho Xiaoming was full of fighting spirit. It's my honor to fight alongside them. Li Qingshan was dissatisfied. Don't you feel honored to fight alongside me? Luo Ho Xiaoming scoffed. Not at all. Li Qingshan sighed. Sigh, you're so unruly. No wonder you're the leader of the 4 heavenly kings. Do you think I'll be satisfied just because you made me the leader of the 4 heavenly kings? Luo Ho Xiaoming rolled his eyes, but he could not help but laugh. Although it was not an honor to fight alongside him, it had always made him feel happy. In the end, Li Qingshan looked at Li Fengyuan. He frowned and turned to Little Anne. Who's this bald donkey? Chapter 1559. Li Fengyuan's expression was unfathomable at first, but when he heard this, his face fell, and he said angrily, Big old father, I'm Fengyuan. I'm also one of the 4 heavenly kings. How could you forget about me? Fengyuan. I think I've heard this name before. Li Qingshan smiled and pinched his chin. How did you get into the 4 heavenly kings? Li Fengyuan was speechless. Although he was a rare phoenix, and his bloodline came from the ancient times, he was still lacking compared to the other 3 heavenly kings. He said weakly, I'm your son. Li Qingshan understood. I see. He patted Li Fengyuan's shoulder. It's no wonder you have a father like me. You're so good at relying on your father at such a young age. You have a bright future ahead of you, kid. Yes. Li Fengyuan clenched his fists tightly. In the stories, don't people who lose their memories have a huge change in personality? Gu Yining tilted her head. I'm probably born to be this shameless. Luo Ho Xiaoming looked up at the sky. Li Qingshan ignored them, and knocked on the Vairocana, on Li Fengyuan's head. Why are you dressed like this? The so-called Vairocana was actually a Vairocana hat with 5 Buddhist crowns. The golden-red Vairocana hat was decorated with pearls and agates, and the design was exquisite. The 5 Buddhist crowns were painted with 5 gilded Buddhas, all of them solemn and dignified. Put together, it was the style of an eminent monk, not something an ordinary monk could wear. If Li Qingshan still had his memory, he would definitely remember a certain story about going to the Buddhist scriptures. Li Fengyuan put his palms together and lowered his head slightly. Namo Amitabha, I've converted to Buddhism. Li Qingshan was slightly stunned. In that instant, Li Fengyuan really had a dignified and righteous aura. Then he flew into a rage and asked Little Anne, which bald donkey did this? He even dared to lie to my son. I'll go and beat his bald head up right now. He then said to Li Fengyuan earnestly, Fengyuan, I know it's not your fault. As the most useless of the 4 heavenly kings, he is too easily influenced by others. There was no hint of blame on his face. Instead, it was filled with pity, as if he was saying, it's not your fault that your brain isn't good. It's all your fault that your biological parents abandoned you, and I didn't take good care of you. That's why you became like this. Li Fengyuan wanted to cry but had no tears. Suddenly his expression changed, and he floated far away. That day, I was cultivating under the golden leaf Bodhi tree in the 100 herb garden. Whoosh! Great winds blew past. Thousands of branches and leaves shone resplendently. He opened his eyes and looked up. His eyebrows were like swords, his eyes like stars, and his long hair fluttered in the wind. No matter how amusing he was in front of Li Qingshan, his nature was still that of a proud phoenix. He had once ruled the city amongst the clouds of the 9 regions, and the alien continent of the 5 regions world, and was deeply convinced by the people. He was revered as a wise ruler. As the eldest of the disciples of Green Mountain, he was called the young prince by those monkeys. He was born with the power that the divine Wudong tree had accumulated for tens of thousands of years, and the inheritance of the phoenix from the distant ancient times. The inheritance included not only the cultivation methods, but also a great amount of knowledge and memories. He couldn't bear too much when he was born, but as his cultivation state grew, these knowledge and memories were activated and became a part of his cultivation state. This was a cultivation path without any hindrance. In fact, it couldn't even be called cultivation. It was merely a natural process of growth. It was like a wild animal growing up from an infant to an adult. Long before the goddess Nviwa created the human race, when the term cultivation didn't even exist, the phoenix was already a lofty god. As long as he didn't die, it was only a matter of time before he became a god. What he didn't lack the least was time. As a phoenix that could be reborn from nirvana, his name wasn't even recorded in the book of life and death. He was born free from the threat of death, and possessed all the things that people dreamed of, but he still didn't think it was enough. Though the four heavenly kings sounded like a joke to him, he was well aware of what kind of path Li Qingshan was taking, and what would happen to him if he failed. Thus, for 3 years, he didn't leave the Bodhi tree at all. He cultivated hard day after day. In fact, even if he ate, drank, and played all day, the speed of his power growth was far faster than that of ordinary people who cultivated hard. But even if he cultivated hard, the speed of his improvement wasn't much faster. As a natural god, he paid more attention to natural growth than acquired cultivation. Under such circumstances, this speed was far from enough. Do I have to hide in the back and cheer when Big Daddy is fighting to the death at the front? Wait for him to win or die in battle? Li Fengyuan frowned, with a stubborn expression that was similar to Li Qingshan's. He needed power, power that could match the title of 4 heavenly kings, even if it was just a joke, cooking king. At this moment, the wind suddenly quieted down. There was no chirping of birds or chirping of insects. Everything was silent, but the leaves were still dancing. A majestic and deep Buddhist chant sounded from the sky, from the ground, and from the bottom of his heart. At first, it sounded like the buzzing of mosquitoes, but it grew louder and louder. In an instant, it sounded like a thunderous lion's roar. Sunlight shone through the gaps of the golden leaves, and suddenly it was so dazzling that one couldn't look at it directly. Li Fengyuan stared with his eyes wide open, and the light intertwined to form a lifelike image. At this point, he changed the topic and asked, "Guess what I saw?" Smack! Li Qingshan knocked him on the head impatiently. "Brat, don't keep us in suspense. Tell me," Li Fengyuan said angrily. "Li Qingshan, I'm not a child anymore. Can't you show me some respect?" Li Qingshan smiled and said, "In Big Daddy's eyes you'll always be a child." His face darkened. "If you talk nonsense again, I'll hang you up and beat you." All right. Li Fengyuan could only be honest. "I saw a Buddha statue." "Buddha statue? Are you hallucinating?" And then?" Li Fengyuan spread his hands. "Then I converted to Buddhism." "Wait, did I miss a part of this story?" Li Qingshan gnashed his teeth, as if he was pondering the meaning behind it. Gu Yinying and Luo Hoshaming looked at each other. This was not just a problem of missing the story. Li Fengyuan was not an ignorant and superstitious villager. Unless he was possessed, it was impossible for him to make a mistake. If he really saw the incarnation of a Buddha, then things would not be as simple as it seemed. Moreover, Li Fengyuan obviously hid the most important part of the story, which made people feel that there was a big problem. Little An frowned slightly. She had a deeper understanding of Buddhism. "Sunlight Buddha statue Vairocana?" Li Qingshan said. "All right, let me think about it. You said you were cultivating, then you looked up and saw the sunlight like a Buddha statue. And then you converted to Buddhism?" "Yes." Li Fengyuan nodded. Li Qingshan grabbed Li Fengyuan's clothes. "Brat, are you fucking kidding me?" Li Fengyuan was not convinced. "I'm fucking kidding you. Bite me, you bastard. You're rebelling." Li Qingshan raised his fist. "My son hit me," Li Fengyuan shouted. Gu Yinying also could not help but laugh. TSK like father like son. Li Qingshan was even more furious. He swung his fist and punched. Li Fengyuan closed his eyes. His expression was solemn, as if he was going to die for justice. However, the fist stopped in front of him. He opened his eyes. "Big Daddy." Li Qingshan let go of his clothes and sighed with a smile. "You've really grown up," he said solemnly. "You have to make your own choice and bear it yourself. You don't have to walk the same path as me. You don't owe me anything. You can do whatever you want. Remember, you have to live for yourself." "I understand." Li Fengyuan looked straight into Li Qingshan's eyes. "Big Daddy, I won't always be the most useless one among the 4 heavenly kings." Li Qingshan patted his shoulder. He did not pursue the matter any further. Even if he chose to become his enemy one day, there was nothing he could say. Of course, he could not be blamed for being merciless. Li Fengyuan snickered. He had come to a realization. In his unfinished story, he had indeed betrayed a few extremely important things. Eternal life or power? That was the question. However, he was not one of those old spirit turtles. If he could not follow his heart, what was the point of eternal life? However, that was all for himself, so there was no need to say anything more. He bade farewell to Li Qingshan and returned to the golden leaf Bodhi tree. As for Little An, Gu Yinying and Luo Ho Xiaoming, they all returned to the hungry ghost realm, the demonic beast realm, and the Azura realm to cultivate. After reaching the major achievement of the spirit turtle transformation, Li Qingshan was already infinitely close to the sixth heavenly tribulation. As long as he broke through any of his other transformations, he could immediately undergo the tribulation. However, the loss of his memories was far too severe. He had lost all of his comprehension, which was equivalent to several dozen bottlenecks appearing out of nowhere. If this continued, let alone advancing any further, his cultivation might even regress. Even his miniature world would collapse. As a result, he maintained the spirit turtle transformation the entire time, attempting to derive all the transformations anew. However, this was clearly not easy. The nature of the other transformations was no weaker than the spirit turtle transformation, and they possessed completely different wills. Spirit sovereign Guihai sat in the sky and derived here and there. The myriad heavenly tome had only nurtured a group of human emperors. His original cultivation was there. This was his limit. No matter how powerful his ability to derive was, their paths were different, so it was useless no matter what he said. Under these circumstances, the spirit turtle transformation instead became an obstacle. Every fiend god transformation represented a different path. If he went too far on the path of the spirit turtle, he would have to start from the beginning for the other paths. It was truly extremely difficult. His speed of derivation was as slow as a turtle's crawl. There were less than 10 years left until the Nether River Blood Oath. Seeing how time was becoming more and more pressing, he could only be patient and take it slow. Suddenly, a black paper crane drifted into the dwelling one day and unfurled slowly. Chao Tianjiao's voice rang through the cavern. Li Qingshan, the day of the final battle is approaching. Are you ready? Ha 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 ha. Her laughter was filled with undisguised malice. After becoming a human immortal, bullying Li Qingshan basically became her greatest hobby. The more Li Qingshan resisted, the happier she became. Towards the end, he just played dead and let her do whatever she wanted. He treated it like he had fucked her. He had already accepted it. He had basically received retribution for taking advantage of her in the past. However, they had already been husband and wife for who knew how many nights, yet she had still not forgotten about the bet. She basically did not treat him as a human. Chapter 1560. With a flick of Li Qingshan's finger, the paper crane turned into powder and scattered on the black water. The fury in his heart was extinguished after a moment. Those 3 mountains were left for demon god Qiongqi, not for a fight with a woman. His gaze was deep and dark like the black water, rippling slightly. In the blink of an eye, he had calculated the pros and cons. If he had not forgotten everything, he might have had the power to fight. Challenging a divine General Lu Ding in his current state was undoubtedly asking to be humiliated. Thus, the best choice was to admit defeat and not give Chao Tianjiao a chance to be complacent. And that woman would definitely not expect him to avoid the battle. Yes, ever since he had mastered the spirit turtle transformation, he had always easily regained his calm and considered problems with pure rationality, so pure that it was almost ice cold. But he just felt that something was missing. But what was it missing? He lowered his head and pressed his hand against his chest. His heartbeat was extremely slow, and his blood seemed to have cooled down. It flowed along his veins to his limbs and bones, bringing with it an indescribable coldness. If he closed his eyes, he would feel like he was still drifting in the ruins of End, the black water gradually devouring his warmth and memories. Who am I? In fact, he had only heard one good story up until now. The main character was called Li Qingshan. Perhaps it had been embellished by the narrator, intentionally or unintentionally, that Li Qingshan was both brave and persistent. He usually liked to joke around, but at crucial moments, he was very valiant, as if he would always be a youth. He lowered his head. On the black water, there was only the cold face of an adult man. In order not to disappoint little Anne, he tried to imitate that Li Qingshan and joke with those heavenly kings. But who am I? Looking up at the round sky, he felt that it had never been so far, and it was getting further and further away. He was sinking into the abyss alone, and one day, he would sink into the ruins of End. Everything was reasonable. Losing almost all of his memories was equivalent to experiencing a cycle of reincarnation. How could it be recovered with a story or a novel? She must have sensed it the moment she saw him. That was why she had cried so bitterly. On the contrary, he had sensed it later. Or perhaps even been ignorant. I am to her. More than half of me is dead, with only one breath left. She wants to keep this breath, which is why she wants to return to the 5 continents world. Water droplets fell into the black water on the jagged and overhanging stalactites. His eyes flickered slightly. For a split second, his smile was filled with sorrow and bitterness, but it disappeared in a flash. He gritted his teeth and struggled to get up with a ferocious expression. He broke free from all the beliefs his spirit turtle bloodline had bestowed upon him. What calm planning! What self-preservation! He had to accept the challenge. Even if he brought disgrace upon himself, he absolutely couldn't admit defeat. Otherwise, would I still be Li Qingshan? He took a deep breath and roared towards the heavens. Black water surged, rumbling in the abyss as it rushed into the heavens. Fight! Before falling into the abyss. You have no choice. The day of the final battle, the Black Tortoise Arena. The true disciples had arrived long ago. They were chatting and laughing at the viewing platform on the cliff. Chao Tianjiao had specially invited them to watch the battle. Even if they didn't have an invitation, how could they not watch such a lively scene? Someone asked with a smile. Lu Tian, why don't you start gambling? Lu Tian shrugged. I'm not qualified. Clearly, he wasn't just talking about himself. The true disciples looked at each other. No one was dissatisfied. One was the eldest senior brother, the army commander, a ruthless character who faced the demon god head-on. The other was a human immortal. The head of the 6 deities was a true marshal. The weak gambled with the strong. Even if the strong did not mind, they were overestimating themselves. They deserved to be slapped to death. Besides, these 2 people were quite vengeful. Lu Tian crossed his hands behind his head and said lazily, If I start the bet, who do you want to bet on? Of course, senior sister Chao. Although the eldest senior brother is powerful, senior sister Chao wants to teach him a lesson. Then there's a match. What's the match? I'm teaching my son. Pfft. Ha 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 ha. Everyone roared with laughter. All these years, Chao Tianjiao had taught Li Qingshan a lesson. All kinds of jokes were spread among the true disciples. Such a bet was meaningless. The combat power of a human immortal was completely overwhelming. It was not something a human emperor could compare to. To put it bluntly, it was a complete farce. Only Lu Tian suddenly came to a realization. He turned and bowed. Greetings, eldest senior brother. Li Qingshan stood with his hands behind his back on another cliff not far away. He looked like a philosopher in deep thought. The true disciples were immediately dumbfounded. Greetings, eldest senior brother. Especially the one who was joking. He was even more flustered. Eldest senior brother, when did you come? It's been a while. Li Qingshan looked back. His eyes were deep and serene, as if he could see through everything. It made the true disciples feel like they were facing spirit sovereign Gui Hai. They instantly recalled every detail of the demon domain battlefield. That peerless stance of challenging the demon god. Only then did they suddenly realize that the shadow of war had never gone far. The person in front of them was the brightest and brightest mark of that terrifying nightmare. No matter how they joked, they could not dim it. The scales of victory in their hearts immediately wavered. Maybe, eldest senior brother, really has a chance? Wan Yaozhu sighed inwardly. He has become increasingly unfathomable. It's just that he seems to have changed a lot. Li Qingshan retracted his gaze and continued to ponder. It was not that he could not joke, but now he was even more indifferent. Even if he tried his best to deduce and calculate, he could not find a chance. He suddenly looked up. A silver star suddenly lit up in the clear sky. A beam of starlight shot over and transformed into a silver-armored and white-robed Valkyrie in midair. She was riding on a black-furred sky-gazing hoe. She looked majestic and imposing. Greetings, senior sister. The true disciples did not dare to look straight at her. They all bowed their heads. That was the natural pressure, brought about by the difference in their ranks. Li Qingshan stared silently. His eyes flickered. No need for formalities. Chao Tianjiao generously waved her hand and pretended to ponder. Hiss. I vaguely remember that someone wanted to challenge me back then. Li Qingshan was speechless. How could he remember what happened back then? He only knew that it happened. Chao Tianjiao continued to provoke him. I think it was a guy with the surname Li. He was called Black Mountain and Green Mountain. Who is it? Stand out if you have the guts. Li Qingshan continued to remain silent. Or rather, that question had triggered his thoughts again. What? Were you castrated? Chao Tianjiao found it strange. If it were in the past, he would have lost his composure long ago and fought with his life on the line. Why was he so well behaved today? It was as if he had changed into a different person. What exactly happened during this period of time? It couldn't be that he really castrated himself to prevent her from succeeding, right? Right at this moment, a voice that was 10 times more mocking than Chao Tianjiao resounded in the Black Tortoise arena. Slut, do you want to try? A man walked over in the air. His chest and scarlet robes were tattered. He was blazing like fire and dyed the sky red. The gloomy and violent aura turned into a violent gale, causing the sky to change color. Chapter 1561. Li Qingshan and Li Qingshan looked at each other at the same time. They had the same figure and appearance, but no one would mistake them for the same person. They were completely different ice and fire. They were also different from the original Li Qingshan. The black water of the ultimate and the torture of hell had left a clear mark on them, creating a huge and irreconcilable difference. Indifference or madness, silence or roar, acceptance or revenge. Sparks flew as they stared at each other. One sneered, his killing intent blazing. The other silently held the 3 mountains. The atmosphere in the Black Tortoise arena suddenly changed, as if they had returned to the tragic battlefield of the demon realm. No true disciple dared to treat this as a joke. Chao Tianjiao was furious. Bastard, who are you calling a slut? Wait, primordial spirit? Hey, I'm talking about whoever agreed. Li Qingshan suppressed his killing intent and turned to look at Chao Tianjiao. But in his heart, he was thinking, that's not the look of me. In that case, we'll have to fight. However, he didn't realize that his eyes were much gloomier after returning from hell. His tattered robe fluttered in the wind, making him look like a demon. The true disciples were in an uproar. Primordial spirit. Li Qingshan had only been in the sect for 30 years. From a small nascent soul cultivator to a disciple, he had condensed his yin spirit and yang spirit, becoming the eldest senior brother of the Myriad Nature sect. For cultivators like them, this was just a few seclusion sessions. This was already incredible enough, but now he had gone one step further and survived 6 heavenly tribulations. This was challenging their understanding, and their minds were in a mess. Yes, if he's not a primordial spirit cultivator, how can he have such an aura and compete with senior sister Chao? But how is this possible? Is he the reincarnation of some mighty figure? Is there a son of destiny in the human world? Even Chao Tianjiao found it unbelievable and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" With her eyesight, she immediately saw the huge difference between the 2 Li Qingshan. She vaguely guessed that Li Qingshan's yang spirit had gone out of control. She didn't know what kind of opportunity he had encountered, but he had survived 6 heavenly tribulations and cultivated a primordial spirit. Such incidents were not rare in the cultivation world, and the consequences were often disastrous. Her question was of utmost importance. If this primordial spirit Li Qingshan used another name, it would mean that he had to sever all ties with his original self, and there would be a possibility of coexistence. However, if his answer was still Li Qingshan, then a life-and-death battle would be unavoidable. The sky could not have 2 suns, and a country could not have 2 masters. It was impossible for there to be 2 Li Qingshan in the world. This bastard kid, he didn't hesitate to sacrifice his yang spirit to deceive me. Now he's getting what he deserves. She was in a dilemma, not knowing which side to stand on. If he sat back and did nothing, Li Qingshan would definitely die. Li Qingshan, who was on the ground, muttered to himself, "Who am I?" Li Qingshan, who was in the sky, laughed. This question was too easy to answer. "I'm your uncle." The corner of Chao Tianjiao's eyes twitched, and she suddenly laughed out loud. Good, that's great. This was supposed to be a life and death duel, but I've been playing for so many years, and I really can't kill him. Now I don't have a headache. She slowly pulled out a long silver saber. The stars on the saber were shining, arranged in the 7 mansions of the black tortoise. The light was like mercury spilling on the ground, and the cold murderous aura was like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. In the sky, Li Qingshan strolled calmly with his hands behind his back. Although it's said that to resist foreign aggression, one must first pacify the interior. It's hard to dispel the hatred in my heart if I don't teach you a lesson today. He clearly remembered all the things he had been bullied over the years, and he gnashed his teeth in hatred. He knew that his other self was observing him, and he also knew that Qiao Tianjiao was not an opponent that could be easily defeated. If he couldn't win, things would become very troublesome. But he just wanted to let himself see who the real Li Qingshan was. A cold light flashed. Qiao Tianjiao made the first move. Li Qingshan was cut in half in the air. He laughed and said, "That's it. Let's see how many times you can divide it." Qiao Tianjiao laughed coldly. She waved her saber extremely slowly, turning hardness into softness. The saber's edge released rings of silver light that were as bright as the moon. The brilliance was all-encompassing layer upon layer. In an instant, countless cruel and murderous black tortoise saber astral saber condensed. Li Qingshan's thick eyebrows raised. This woman really didn't stay in the 9 heavens for nothing. Everyone watched as Li Qingshan was sliced apart layer by layer. Every slice was so thin that one could clearly see his blood vessels and bones, and they scattered in the sky. Qiao Tianjiao didn't feel proud at all. She knew very well that until now, he had taken the initiative to divide his primordial spirit. The layers of Li Qingshan had a mocking face on every slice. From the smallest slice on the fingertip to the largest slice on the chest, they all said together, "Good saber technique, but it's useless." Such a strange scene left everyone dumbfounded. It was something that they wouldn't even dream of in their nightmares. Useless? Then try this. Qiao Tianjiao's expression was stern. She raised her saber high. Brilliance flowed backward and gathered on the saber's edge, becoming brighter and brighter. In the blink of an eye, it was so dazzling that one couldn't look at it directly. It dyed the entire black tortoise arena into a silver world. Under the silver radiance, every cut surface became sluggish, losing the carefree feeling of being light as a feather. Li Qingshan felt immense pressure. Coldness quickly seeped into his primordial spirit, as if he had returned to the glacier of the Hell realm. However, this coldness was far more destructive than the torture of hell. Such an indiscriminate attack rendered all transformation techniques useless. It became a battle of pure strength. Qiao Tianjiao was a human immortal, but he didn't have a physical body. In a sense, he was just a ghost immortal. Not only was he restrained by his abilities, but he also didn't have an advantage in terms of strength. If this went on, it was only a matter of time before he was defeated. All the slices were pieced together again, but they didn't form a human figure. It was as if they had messed up the order in their panic, turning into a monster that was made up of humans, but was completely inhuman. Furthermore, it was as if it was forcefully piecing them together. Every part was growing wantonly, growing countless limbs. It became more and more strange and distorted, indescribable. All the true disciples' minds were violently impacted. The more they wanted to distinguish it, the more painful and confused they became. They wanted to shift their gazes away, but they couldn't do it. They were firmly attracted. There were countless faces on the indescribable monster's body. There were countless different expressions on them. Laughter, anger, fear, mockery, guilt. There were countless changes in emotions, causing them to lose control and almost go berserk. Qiao Tianjiao's blade trembled slightly, and the silver brilliance dimmed. The indescribable monster had countless mouths on its body. They were making indescribable sounds at her, and her mind was buzzing. Chapter 1562. Oh no! Qiao Tianjiao's heart sank, and a warm feeling filled her entire back. It was as if the silver armor didn't exist, and her skin was pressed tightly against his chest. She said angrily, "Bastard, despicable." In a head-on battle, Li Qingshan was no match for him. Even if he used the world-destroying divine fire, it would be useless. Moreover, the way of true martial was full of killing intent, which was very good at restraining devils. However, when they were ambushed at Cold Blood Pass, he had sacrificed his young spirit to help her condense the black tortoise's primordial spirit through dual cultivation. This left a loophole, a back door, that was only open to him. Originally, Li Qingshan wasn't strong enough. Even if he sneaked in, he would be beaten up. Now that he had gone through 6 heavenly tribulations, they were in the same realm, so the situation was reversed. Ha, you have the cheek to say that. Li Qingshan smiled evilly. Bitch, have you forgotten how you've treated me all these years? Chao Tianjiao said angrily. If you call me bitch again, You'll what? Li Qingshan's hand passed through the armor and placed it on her chest. Stop. Chao Tianjiao was embarrassed and angry. Not here. Okay, then let's go somewhere else. Li Qingshan chuckled and pounced on her. Chao Tianjiao's vision blurred. The black tortoise arena disappeared, and the scenery in front of her was extremely familiar. The river gurgled, the willows swayed, and a familiar voice sounded in her ears. Do you still remember? This is our old place. This was the illusion from their first dual cultivation. But this time, she clearly knew that she had been dragged into a nightmare by him. Instead, she heaved a sigh of relief. Then, she realized that there was no saber in her hand, no armor on her body, only a thin layer of gauze that faintly outlined her perfect figure. She was tightly held in his arms. She angrily slapped back, but her hand was weak and powerless. He casually caught it and said with a smile, "Let's do it again. Let's dual cultivate." The direct disciples woke up from the chaos. In the sky, the indescribable monster had already disappeared, leaving only Chao Tianjiao in the sky. Her face was expressionless, and her eyes were tightly shut, as if she had fallen into a deep sleep. They looked at each other in shock. They knew that the move Li Qingshan used just now wasn't aimed at them. They were just affected by it. Otherwise, they would have already gone berserk, and even died from madness. The power of a human deity is truly terrifying. Or I should say, as expected of eldest senior brother. No matter how bad the situation is, he still has the ability to turn things around. They simultaneously looked at Li Qingshan, who was on the cliff, yet they saw that not only was there no complacent expression on his face, his expression was solemn, as if he was facing a great enemy. This was because he had also been affected by it, as well as the deep malice from his other self. Due to the spirit turtle's bloodline, he naturally suppressed all demonic thoughts, so he was not affected too much. However, he could clearly see that when the monster vanished and his other self appeared behind Chao Tianjiao in human form, saying, "Don't forget, I'm your inner demon," he was looking at himself. As he stared at the blue sky, his abyss-like heart rippled slightly. The situation was overwhelmingly disadvantageous to him. That was no regular enemy, but himself, who possessed the most complete memories. He knew everything about the 9 transformations of the demonic and divine. Not only was he extremely skilled in slaughter, but he also possessed terrifying determination and willpower. Right now, the best plan was to retreat to the Netherism dwelling. He had already reconstructed the Netherism formation, which was enough to stop regular human deities. However, he only sat there without moving. A stubbornness that did not belong to the spirit turtle made him remain where he was. Light shone in his eyes, and he waved his hand resolutely. Pieces of the spirit turtle's profound shell flew through the air, stacking together to form an indestructible fortress. He did not hope for this defense to be of much use. It was just to avoid sudden attacks and give him enough time to react. Gripping the 3 mountains tightly, he said sternly, "Let's fight to the death, Li Qingshan." Today, only a single person could continue using this name. At this moment, Chao Tianjiao's presence rapidly weakened, as if it had been sucked into an invisible black hole. In the nightmare, Li Qingshan conquered and plundered her wantonly. She did not put up much resistance, as if she was completely submerged in pleasure. She would only look at him with a strange gaze from time to time. No matter how many vicious words he uttered, this was not a battle to the death. They were not some irreconcilable enemy. Instead, they were partners of cultivation. Who knew how many times they had shared pleasure like this? This time he was just turning the tables and becoming the master. Simply put, he would change their positions. Otherwise, even if he used an opening, he would not have succeeded so easily. Even if he could succeed, he would not dare to do as he pleased. Based on Chao Tianjiao's personality, she would rather die indiscriminately than be humiliated for no reason. Chao Tianjiao suddenly asked, "Are you really going to kill yourself?" Li Qingshan said angrily, "It's none of your business. This is my own business." Which one of you should I acknowledge? No matter which one it is, I don't need you to acknowledge me. I'm really curious. What have you been through? You seem to have suffered a lot. Chao Tianjiao suddenly reached out and caressed Li Qingshan's cheeks, as if she was feeling pity for him. After so many years of fighting and fooling around, of course, the main reason was that she had beaten him mercilessly. If she had been merciless, why would she have left any openings? At this moment, their hearts were connected, and there was even a hint of sorrow. Only extreme pain could make a person so strong. "Don't pity me." Li Qingshan frowned, grabbed her wrist and pressed her to the ground. He tried his best to absorb as much power as possible through dual cultivation, to temporarily make up for the lack of a physical body. Even so, he still harbored a deep sense of wariness. "Are you still afraid that you can't win?" Chao Tianjiao was puzzled. "I've never underestimated myself." Li Qingshan had a clear intuition that in his hands, there must be a great killing weapon that could kill him. It was very likely that it came from the ultimate, from another great sage. If that's the case, why not let yourself live? Just go our separate ways. Chao Tianjiao licked her lips, purposely using a joke to cover up her worry. "I can still change things up a little. It's not fun to perish together. Don't worry. No matter what, Li Qingshan will survive. Otherwise, who will continue on this path to the 9 heavens? That person doesn't have to be me." If it really came to the point where he had to perish together, he would not hesitate. If sacrificing himself could help him, then so be it. Even if he killed himself, as long as this precious message from the endless hell was passed on, everything would not be in vain. Continue no matter what. Chao Tianjiao was taken aback. "You really are a madman." Li Qingshan smiled and waved his hand. "Goodbye, bitch." On the cliff, Li Qingshan's heart shivered. "It's here." The sky suddenly darkened. A hideous demon god with indigo-colored skin, 3 heads, and 6 arms stood in the sky. It bore the bearing of a heavenly demon, and was furious. A black aura wrapped around it, rising up like fire. It was filled with an unprecedented will of destruction and annihilation. Destroy the enemy, destroy the world, and destroy itself. A vertical eye suddenly opened on its forehead. In the next moment, the apocalyptic fire incinerated the entire cliff, destroying the fortress condensed from the spirit turtle's profound shell. Surrounded by the all-destroying fire, the other Li Qingshan raised the mountain-moving tablet high into the air. This was an arcane treasure personally bestowed by the mountain-moving sage. It was enough to fend off a demon god, so it easily separated the apocalyptic fire. The 3 mountains began to grow restless. In the sky, the pupils of Li Qingshan, who had assumed the form of a heavenly demon, narrowed. He immediately felt life-threatening danger. "This is the treasure I obtained from Ruin's End. It really is powerful." Although he might be the first person to die to this thing, since this was the path he had chosen, he did not care about the mockery of fate. "Come." But in the next moment, I put down the mountain-moving tablet in his hand and opened his arms towards the sky. Li Qingshan was stunned at first before becoming furious. He had never thought there would be a day when I would actually give up on resisting and allow myself to be slaughtered by someone else. Even if that person was him. This son of a bitch was not worthy of using the name Li Qingshan. But he would never let this heaven-sent opportunity slip by. He lunged into the body of the demonic god and began to possess it. In the beginning, he was still cautious against me, wondering if me had any tricks up his sleeves. However, me did not resist at all, nor did he have any intention of dying together. He silently allowed me to take over everything. Li Qingshan questioned furiously, "Why? Could it be that a trip to Ruin's End had turned me into such a pathetic state? Was my will so weak that it could not even withstand a single blow?" I closed his eyes. The past flashed before his eyes. Apart from the dark ruin's end, there was only her face. From a certain perspective, he was like a baby that had just been born a few months ago. Apart from the remnant memories of his past life, there was only the days and nights he spent with her, the tears and laughter. Chapter 1563. Li Qingshan's heart shuddered. As the possession succeeded step by step, he gradually devoured her memories. The memories were far too shallow. They were not surging torrents, but just a few shattered pieces of ice. Every single piece possessed the same dark, deep background, and the same scenes were reflected on them repeatedly. The great sage of Moving Mountain, who stood as majestic as a mountain in the ruins of End, the well-like sky in the Netherism dwelling, and her crying like a homeless child. This scene stabbed him deeply. It was even more painful than enduring the tortures of hell. So, I have forgotten everything. So, I was not a coward. They had all gone through terrifying hardships, only breaking free from their predicament after exhausting everything they had. They were all covered in wounds. Even though he had never lost any of his memories, the tortures of hell, and the unforgettable betrayal, made him burn with fury and hatred, as well as deep suspicion. If even great sages could betray one another, just what would the end of the Nine Heavens path be like? How could he not be filled with questions? Until this moment, I sank into the boundless sea of consciousness calmly. I could not help but think again, just who am I? Even with the perfect spirit turtle bloodline, allowing me to peer into the heavenly secrets and see through fate. This was the only question that remained unanswered. Sigh, I still don't understand. However, it no longer mattered. Li Qingshan had already returned. Suddenly a voice answered with certainty. You're Li Qingshan. A huge hand grabbed me firmly and dragged me out of the depths of the sea. On the surface of the sea, the two Li Qingshans looked at one another like they were looking at a mirror. They possessed the same appearance, but they possessed completely different bearings. The world spun. Violence and silence, passion and coldness, repeatedly argued, clashed. As it turns out, my spirit turtle transformation has already reached major success. It can naturally suppress all demonic thoughts. If I hadn't given up on my own, it's basically impossible for me to be possessed. And, if it were an open confrontation, he would even understand just how terrifying the three mountains were, even better than me with all his memories. Did I spare his life? Yes. Strictly speaking, I was the original body. He was just a soul. Possessing the body of a fiend god, he had unparalleled potential. If he wanted to turn the tables, this might be his only chance. However, he smiled casually. The next moment, I felt the torrent of memories surging in. The past that she had described was all vivid in his mind. His youth accompanied by bulls. His youth traversing the world. The first meeting with her. The parting with Brother Neo. Everything became extremely clear. It was no longer just a wonderful story, but a real life. The emotions contained in it were so strong that they easily broke through the frozen heart and turned it into a turbulent sea. The fiend god transformations that he had to suppress were awakened one by one. The frozen small world in Xiao Chen's body began to revolve once more, and the world rumbled. I finally found my name. I frowned and looked at him with a complicated expression. Why? Even though they had the same memories, it made up for the differences between them. However, due to the fundamental difference between the fiend god body and the Mahasvara primordial spirit, there was still a huge divergence between them. It was impossible for them to merge into one so easily. To me, it was naturally a huge benefit. However, to him, not only was he giving up the victory that was within his reach, but he was also strengthening his opponent. After recovering his memories, he recovered his fighting spirit and arrogance. You are willing to die for her, but I am not willing to live for her. Aren't you afraid that after I go through the sixth tribulation, I will immediately suppress you and refine my primordial spirit? This fragile balance was only because the primordial spirit was one realm higher than the main body. Once their realms were the same, I would have an overwhelming advantage. By then, destroying the primordial spirit that was causing trouble would be the best choice. Your thoughts can't escape my monitoring. He pointed at his head. monitoring myself. There must be something wrong with his brain. I mocked myself and looked into his eyes. People change. Yeah, people do change. However, in infernal hell, Brother Lu Er told me, you must believe that we are different from those guys in the sky. Even though he was betrayed, he still persisted. If he didn't even dare to believe in himself, what was the point of the so-called 9 skies? He returned all his memories and didn't keep anything back. He turned and disappeared from the boundless sea of consciousness, returning to the small world. Only me was left. Recalling everything that happened in infernal hell, his expression became determined. I want to believe. I believed that one day, I would be able to reach an agreement with him. I believed that day wouldn't be too far away. When I was in a desperate situation again, facing an undefeatable enemy, these small differences wouldn't mean anything. Survival and killing the enemy were the most important. Everyone knew this. Compared to destroying each other, this was the only way to unleash the strongest power. Along the way, the last thing Li Qingshan lacked were dire straits and powerful enemies. Who asked us to choose such a path? I closed my eyes and digested the memories. The world-destroying godly flame disappeared, and the terrifying aura that could destroy everything dissipated. The direct disciples looked at each other in fear. Some of them didn't understand what had happened. Only Chao Tianjia was shocked, as though she had seen something unbelievable. Normally, when clones lost control like this, they would either split up, fight it out, or even perish together. However, she had never heard of anyone being able to coexist peacefully in the end. This was the greatest difference between Li Qingshan and regular cultivators. If what he pursued was longevity, then only if he split up could he avoid the danger of death. If what he pursued was benefits, then all he could do was find a way to finish off the other party. Only then could he monopolize everything. The human heart was fickle. Faced with a situation like this, just how many people would be willing to sacrifice themselves, fulfill themselves, and believe in themselves? She sighed with a smile. This bastard really is a monster. Li Qingshan digested all the memories and slowly opened his eyes, breaking free from the spirit turtle transformation. Although he had not retracted his soul, all of the divine and demonic transformations had been revived. As long as he broke through again, he could undergo the 6th heavenly tribulation. Moreover, everything his soul had experienced in infernal hell, all of his comprehensions and thoughts, would become new resources for him. In particular, the trade winds that the great sage of ventilation had given him contained even more precious information. Its value was no less than the 3 mountains. All of the divine and demonic transformations could benefit from it. The trip to the demon domain was already imminent. It was time for him to take another step forward. However, before that, he wanted to see Little An first, and tell her, Hungry Ghost Realm, Wuxia City. The lonely city towered high in the sky. Chilly winds howled, and the dark clouds refused to disperse. Little An was currently frowning in worry. She was in no mood to cultivate. He had returned, but he had forgotten who he was. Even though the city still stood loftily, its foundations had already been shaken, collapsing day by day. She could do nothing about this. What was the point of cultivating? At this moment, a figure descended from above. He spread his arms with a smile. I'm back. She was stunned. She wanted to smile, but she could not hold back her tears. She threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. Chapter 1564. A waning moon shone on a lonely city. A good man went on a long journey, experienced the mountains of knives and seas of fire and hell, passed through the endless abyss of the ultimate, and returned home once again. There were thousands of words, but there was no need to pour them out. As long as they looked at each other and smiled, all their longing and pain were comforted. No longer thinking or roaring, he put down the burden on his body and stopped looking up at the sky, to sleep peacefully in her lap on this warm, fine night, and dream a lighter dream. Under the pale moonlight, Little An gently stroked his face and twirled a long string of prayer beads, passing the news of the return of the Demon King to the heavenly kings. Demonic beast Path the Great Kuan was struggling to move its long wing-like fins, swimming into the deep sea. Its body was covered with wounds, and it had just escaped a hunt. The dragon's roar still echoed in its ears. The sea had always been the territory of the dragon clan. If there was a blacklist of the most unpopular creatures, the Great Kuan would definitely be at the top. For her cultivation, she could not leave the sea. Therefore, most of the time, she lived a life of hiding and narrowly escaped death countless times. She did not look as carefree as she seemed. In this natural world where survival of the fittest prevailed, as long as one was not a top hunter, they had to be prepared to become prey. This was the price of freedom, and it was not something the weak could afford. Resting in a large canyon, she received the news and smiled. "It's good that you're back." In the depths of the canyon, a pair of cold eyes suddenly lit up. Thousands of tentacles slowly stretched out in the ravine, and without stirring up any water, they enveloped her like a huge net. A new round of hunting had begun. Azura path wind and smoke rolled the flag, and the war drums shook the stars. Luo Ho Xiaoming was in a fierce battle, but the situation was very unfavorable. The army under his command was retreating, and the military aura condensed on his body was rapidly weakening. He could not fight against the Azura sovereign, who was protected by the god of war. Azura's cultivation method was never through seclusion, but through endless bloody battles. He became an undefeatable god of war. If he did not challenge the strong, there was no meaning in fighting. Blindly bullying the weak would damage his fighting spirit, and he would lose the blessing of heaven. However, challenging the strong was easy to say, but it was simply self-torture. In order to avoid exposing his identity, he couldn't use any of the Rahu clan's power, which was tantamount to fighting against someone stronger than him while shackled. As a result, they were often defeated. It was only because of the providence that they never died in battle, but this good luck came to an end. His current opponent was an Azura battle god, whose realm was equivalent to a man deity or an evil god, but his combat power was enough to crush an ordinary man deity or an evil god. Of course, the other party disdained to attack him directly. At first, they sent people to surrender and wanted to take him in as a general. He was the Azura sovereign who was often defeated but never died, so he was quite famous in this area. Naturally, he was not convinced. The Azura battle god did not waste any more words, and sent out the Azura emperor under his command to encircle and suppress him. As his cultivation level recovered, he no longer cared about ordinary Azura sovereigns. After a few rounds of counterattacks, not only were they not exterminated, but they also grew stronger. That Azura battle god became even more interested in him. He personally commanded the army to surround and annihilate him. In addition to the dozen or so Azura sovereigns who took turns to challenge him, he was no longer a match for them. Now he was heavily surrounded. This time, even if he had the providence, he might not be able to escape. Even if the Azura battle god did not attack directly, he had the providence that did not lose to him, which was enough to offset his advantage. Either surrender or die in battle, there was no third option. Now that he received this information, it was like he was saved from death. What? He recovered his memory. What? His primordial spirit went through 6 gods' trials. Doesn't that mean he split up? Whatever, let him help me fight. The kings fought on their own. No one's life was smooth sailing. They had to overcome all obstacles for a dream. Primordial spirit left the body. Li Qingshan glanced at his sleeping self, smiled at little Anne, and left the hungry ghost realm. He returned to the Xianming cave mansion, entered the Azura realm, and looked up at the blood-red sky. War will never change. Once again, he set off on his journey towards the faraway battlefield. 1,000 miles away from Wuhua City was a vast forest. There was not a single leaf on the dead trees, and there were piles of white bones under the trees. The forest was deathly silent, and no ghouls dared to approach. And in the deepest part of the forest, there was an inconspicuous tree with an inconspicuous burrow protruding from it. Embedded in it was a lustrous white bead that looked like a white eyeball. If one lay prone on it and observed carefully, they would find that it looked like a skull, and it seemed to be laughing strangely. That was little Anne's skull prayer bead. The reason why it was left here was to keep an eye on it. If one were to dive into the white bones and black soil, deep underground, they would see a gloomy and vast underground palace. The aura of death and the aura of Een were stagnant, forming a substantial flocculus. Not to mention this deep underground. Even on a clear day, one would not be able to see their own fingers. This place was like a tomb, or a tomb. The entire Hungry Ghost realm was made up of tombs like this, where countless failed cultivators and fallen souls were buried. This tomb was called Wuhua Palace, and it was the resting place of Wuhua Ghost Immortal. Taking advantage of this old ghost slumber, Li Qingshan and Little and worked together to take over Wuhua City. The ghost emperors and corpse emperors were either dead or surrendered, and they were almost all captured in one fell swoop. All of them became Little Anne's resources. Thus, a skull prayer bead had to be placed here to prevent this victim from suddenly waking up. Although this old ghost slept for 100 years and woke for 100 years, and there were still more than 30 years before he woke up, it was better to be safe than sorry. The Hungry Ghost realm's heavenly mandate was quite hostile to her, a descendant of White Bones. Of course, they weren't good people either. 30 years later, even if the old ghost didn't come looking for trouble with them, they would still drag this guy out to burn the fire. A black stone coffin hung upside down in the center of the underground palace. Below it was a dark and deep abyss that seemed to lead straight to the underworld. This was a node where the veins of the earth intertwined. If this was a normal world, it would definitely be a famous mountain and great river that was filled with spiritual qi. It was the most suitable place to build a cave abode. However, in this Hungry Ghost realm, there was no spiritual qi to speak of. There was only yin qi and death qi that constantly surged out from the abyss and seeped into the stone coffin. On this day, a strange rumbling sound came from the abyss. Dismembered corpses rustled down, and the stone coffin shook slightly. Since many years ago, or more accurately, since the day Li Qingshan and Little and conquered Wuhua City, there had been frequent earthquakes here. It seemed to be a natural phenomenon caused by the movement of the Earth's crust, and it just happened to happen at this time. Earthquakes were the product of a series of coincidences. Perhaps it was just the shattering of a piece of rock that affected the stress structure of the entire plate, and in the end, it became an earth-shattering earthquake. However, the tremors gradually subsided, and the stone coffin that swayed like a pendulum gradually calmed down and became motionless. This Wuhua underground palace itself was an indestructible formation, so it was not afraid of earthquakes at all. Even if the mountains outside collapsed and the earth cracked, there would not be much movement inside. It would be too laughable if the abode of a ghost immortal were to be destroyed in an earthquake. Wuhua Ghost Immortal was in a deep sleep, so he naturally would not be awakened by such a small commotion. However, the situation seemed to be a little different this time. The death qi and yin qi gradually weakened, and before long, they completely disappeared. The stone coffin suddenly opened up a gap. A pitch-black shadow poked its head out from within. It had no eyes, ears, mouth, or nose, and was just a black shadow. It was Wuhua Ghost Immortal. He released a wisp of divine perception, and quickly scanned the entire abyss. He discovered that the direction of the earth veins had changed. He was obviously stunned. The earth veins were equivalent to the internal meridians of a world. Unlike the mountains and rivers on the surface, the speed at which they changed was very slow. Because the Hungry Ghost realm was constantly devouring and expanding, it was slightly faster than the average world, but it would still take at least 1,000,000 years to change. Even if one moved mountains and filled seas, or directly changed the terrain, it would still be very difficult to affect the direction of the earth veins. It would require precise calculations. However, the continuous earthquakes had subtly changed the direction of the earth veins, and it just happened to cut off the earth qi of Wuhua Palace. Was it a coincidence? However, he instinctively felt that things were not that simple. As a ghost immortal, he could already understand the laws of nature. Moreover, over the long period of time, he could see more and more clearly. Divination was as natural as seeing with his eyes and hearing with his ears. However, this divination was inexplicably easier than any other time. There's a change in Wuhua City. Chapter 1565. In the Azura Path, the mountains were like the sea, and the setting sun was like blood. The sky, which was already red, was dyed with blood. The clouds were burning, magnificent and heroic. It was as if there was no day, only dawn and dusk. Dying in battle under the setting sun, and resurrecting under the rising sun. Only the color of blood remained unchanged. It was a tragedy and heroism that people who lived under the blue sky and white clouds could not understand. Bang, bang, bang. The earth shook, and the mountains trembled. A giant walked forward with heavy steps, carrying a palace the size of a small mountain on his back. The palace stood tall, with a white tower and a golden dome, and scattered courtyards and corridors. It was dyed bright red by the sunlight, like a glorious temple. It was also more qualified to be called a temple than most of the temples in the world. Compared to those stone sculptures and clay statues, this was a living Asura battle god. Deep in the courtyard, a middle-aged man was leisurely leaning on a recliner, enjoying the singing and dancing. There was only one female singer. She was draped in a sari, and her face was covered with a veil. There was a sharp white horn on her smooth and jade-like forehead. She danced gracefully, like a bird flying in the wind, or a peacock offering its feathers. The song was sad and moving, like silk, faintly discernible, and intoxicating, turning the courtyard into a secret realm in the forest. The sound of fighting from the distant battlefield reached here, but it was also diluted by the song, becoming an insignificant foil. The man's eyes were half closed, also intoxicated by the song. A nimble figure suddenly jumped out of the void. It was an Asura emperor, who immediately knelt on the ground, cupped his hands and said, "Your Holiness, that brat still refuses to surrender." The murderous aura from the battlefield suddenly broke the silence. But the singer did not stop singing and dancing. Needham reluctantly opened his dark red eyes. As expected of Kinara. Although it's a decadent song, it's hard to let go. Kinara was one of the 8 living beings, known for their singing and dancing skills. They did not belong to the heavenly path, nor did they belong to the Asura path. But they mainly lived in the heavenly path, known as the heavenly music. They were often taken to the Asura path as spoils of war, in the battles between the heavenly path and the Asura path. Their singing was the ultimate enjoyment in the world, and they had the reputation of singing gods. Needham stroked the thick beard on his face and asked the Asura sovereign, "If I give her as a gift, will he surrender?" "Your Eminence, I don't think that kid will surrender even if he dies in battle." The Asura sovereign seemed to have thought of something. There was still lingering fear in his heart, but there was also undisguised admiration in his eyes. "Then it's useless." Needham waved his hand casually, and the woman's head fell to the ground. The headless body was still dancing, and the veiled head was still singing. It was even more mournful and desolate, like a cuckoo weeping blood. For a moment, the Asura sovereign's mind was shaken, and he couldn't control himself. He hurriedly roused his fighting spirit and guarded his battle heart. If one listened to this kind of singing too much, it would definitely wear down one's fighting spirit. Needham twirled the tip of his beard. "If you stand up and fight, you might still have a chance of survival." Following her graceful dance steps, Nara gracefully held up her own head and continued to sing to herself. "To die for Ninggu, to live without fighting, to be stubborn." Needham shook his head regretfully. "I'll go meet that Prince Xiaoming myself." King Xiaoming's army, the central tent. Luoho Xiaoming dismissed his subordinates and faced a map alone. He suddenly pricked up his ears. A sharp whistling sound came from afar, and in an instant, it broke through the heavy military formations and stepped into the tent. "We finally meet, Prince Xiaoming." Needham looked as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. Looking at Luoho Xiaoming's back, his eyes were filled with determination and passion. It wasn't that he had a special preference, but that this talent was too rare. Even though he couldn't use the Rahu clan's divine abilities and spells, the talent and strength that Luoho Xiaoming displayed was still astonishing. In a head-on battle, he didn't fear any Asura sovereign. When commanding an army, he could fight against a battle god. At the same time, he was proficient in many battle techniques, such as assassination and hunting. These were things that flowed in his blood. The war had lasted until now, and all the Asura sovereigns under battle god Needham were completely convinced by him. Needham understood his value better than anyone else. Even battle gods had to fight bloody battles in order to have the chance to become a true Asura king battle god. Other than the heavens, his enemies were other battle gods. If he had such a general behind him when fighting against other battle gods, to help him command the army and gather the spirit of the army, he would have at least a 30% higher chance of winning. This is a gift from Hong Tian. Needham praised Hong Tian in his heart, his eyes even more fervent. Luo Ho Xiaoming turned around. His beard was unshaven and his face was covered in dust, but his eyes were still as bright as stars. In an instant, it gave Needham the illusion that the other party was a battle god that could stand on equal footing with him. Battle god Needham, you can call me Ming, or King Xiaoming. Luo Ho Xiaoming purposely hid the surname, Rahu, and the Prince Xiaoming, that Li Qingshan had forcefully given him. He only kept the word Ming, and had his subordinates call him King Xiaoming. When he turned around, he was forced to add the word Xiaoming in front of his name. He couldn't help but feel unhappy. King Xiaoming. How arrogant. Even I don't dare to call myself that. Needham said jokingly. If you didn't call yourself that, I wouldn't have noticed you so quickly. King Xiaoming was a very arrogant title in the Azura path. After Azura had gone through 7 heavenly tribulations and become true gods, they would go to the western pure land of ultimate bliss and meet the Buddha at the great thunderclap temple of Mount Spirited. After going through a series of tests, they were qualified to be titled King Xiaoming. The wise were the light of wisdom, and the king could control everything. The King Xiaoming appeared angry, protected the Dharma, and scared away evil spirits. He represented the dignity of Buddhism. An Azura sovereign calling himself King Xiaoming was like a young spirit cultivator calling himself a true immortal. It was so arrogant that it bordered on ignorance. How can a sparrow know the ambitions of a great swan? Luo Ho Xiaoming said calmly. He just wanted to take back everything that belonged to him. Yes, Li Qingshan had often bragged to him about this. Good, very good. I admire this about you. Why did the battle gods come? Don't tell me you're going to take action personally. Needham said bluntly. Surrender to me. Your position will be just below mine, and I'll let you command all the troops. Luo Ho Xiaoming raised his eyebrows slightly, as if he hadn't expected Needham to have such a plan. He had just returned to the Azura path, and his cultivation was already not weak. He really hadn't met anyone who was qualified to make him surrender. Needless to say, as a member of the Rahu God clan, all Azuras were nominally his subjects. Unlike ordinary Azuras, they hadn't experienced so many battles at the bottom level. Needham thought he was tempted, and tried to persuade him further. You're still very young. You need more experience and experience. Follow me to conquer everywhere and broaden your horizons. It's only a matter of time before you become a battle god. For ordinary Azura sovereigns, this was indeed the best choice, but for Luo Ho Xiaoming, surrendering would definitely damage his fighting spirit. What he lacked the most was time. His mother could notice this place at any time, and as a Rahu, he would never serve another Azura as his master. He laughed coldly. I don't need you. I can become a battle god too. Needham's expression darkened, instantly becoming ugly and ferocious. No battle god will allow someone like you to rise so easily. Even if I have to personally take action today, I'll make you stay here. You battle gods are really stingy. Luo Ho Xiaoming laughed disdainfully and shook his head. I didn't think of this at first. Forget it, you talk to my boss. Boss? Needham frowned. Could it be that there were already other battle gods behind him? That would be troublesome. He had to end the battle quickly and take him down. Just as he was about to attack, a man suddenly walked out from a dark corner of the tent and patted his chest. That's right, it's me. Needham was shocked. He hadn't noticed when this person had appeared. Luo Ho Xiaoming said, Too slow. You made me say a bunch of nonsense to stall for time. How can you talk to your boss like this? Stop talking nonsense. Can you do it? Luo Ho Xiaoming questioned. The difference between a mere primordial soul and a battle god was not small. Chapter 1566. What did you say? Needham's face gradually became ferocious and livid, like a statue in a gloomy ancient temple. He walked down the altar step by step, and like a falling mountain, he pressed down on Li Qingshan. In fact, his figure didn't change at all. What changed was his momentum, soaring into the sky and stirring up the wind and clouds. The sky suddenly darkened and pressed down on the big tent. All the Asuras on the battlefield looked up. The war god was angry. When the war god was angry, there were millions of corpses and rivers of blood. The victory or defeat of this battle was no longer decided by others. Li Qingshan lowered his head slightly, and under his thick eyebrows, a pair of black eyes sparkled. He said with a faint smile, "Let's make a deal. You get out now, and I will spare your life. How about that?" The gloom in Luo Hoshaoming's heart was swept away. This was the Li Qingshan in his memory. He couldn't help but laugh loudly. "Go boss, bite him to death." "You shut up." Li Qingshan glared at him and thought, "I want to bite him to death." The Asura war god wasn't comparable to the infernal judge. Although the latter had infiltrated the system, because of this his combat power was really worrying. In essence, he was just a ghost immortal. The war god had fought his way through bloody battles. He had an undying Asura body, and extremely terrifying combat power. It took him a lot of effort to sneak attack Judge Liu. Now that it was a head-on confrontation, he really had no advantage at all. So he deliberately provoked Needham and shook his mind, so that he could take advantage of the situation and trigger the inner demon's counterattack. Needham was furious, like a volcano that could erupt at any time. The next moment he regained his calmness. "You're not Asura. Who are you?" This made Li Qingshan recall the frozen dead fire in the iceberg, and he sighed in his heart. What a perfect willpower. Against Judge Liu's moves, I'm afraid there's no use in this sky. Turning his head, Luo Hoshaoming said with a solemn face. "Xiaoming, let's escape." Luo Hoshaoming facepalmed. "I don't know this person." Needham laughed. "Prince Xiaoming, is this your so-called boss?" Li Qingshan said. "Wait, where's the Heavenly King?" "Heavenly King?" Needham's pupils constricted as if he was completely infuriated. He said in a low voice. "What exactly are you? Human immortal, ghost immortal, undead immortal? The Asura path isn't a place for people like you. Since it wasn't easy for you to cultivate to this stage, get out immediately, and I'll spare your life." Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the sky. Compared to the Wisdom King, the gods of the heavenly Tao could become the heavenly kings, and they were the most hated existences by Asura. "All right." Li Qingshan shrugged. "Finally, I have one more question." "What?" Boom. Lightning tore through the sky, and the tent was torn to shreds by the strong wind. A figure flew out with a whoosh, sweeping across the entire battlefield. He crashed through several mountain peaks, and sank deep into a cliff. The aura that belonged to the Asura battle god seemed to have been severed by a blade. It was a demon god with 3 heads and 6 arms. His muscles were knotted, and his skin was indigo like it was cast from steel. His entire body was burning with black flames that resonated with the red sky above his head, dyeing the world black and red. Li Qingshan slowly retracted his fist and opened his arms to the sky. He laughed and asked in a hoarse and inhuman voice, "Who said I'm not an Asura?" The power he had obtained from Chao Tianjiao had not dissipated yet, and it completely exploded at this moment. The vast mandate of heaven descended from the sky and formed the Asura immortal body. He would not lose to any Asura battle god. He was the son of heaven of the Asura path. He closed his eyes and felt the unprecedented majestic power in his body. It was so huge and violent that he could not control it. At this moment, the realm he comprehended in the colorless realm came into play. Wisps of wind poured into his eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and 36,000 pores, blowing through the great freedom primordial spirit. In the blink of an eye, he subdued this violent god power with the 4 skies meditation, and opened his eyes. "Kid, watch carefully," Luo Hoshaoming said seriously. "I'll wait and see." Li Qingshan stepped on the black flames and flew into the sky. He was very unhappy that he had to give up halfway in that battle with himself. Now he could finally continue. The undefeatable Asura battle god? This kind of enemy was interesting. In the broken cliff, Needham nodded slightly. "I see." He was completely unharmed. Only the fist mark on his chest was quickly fading away. He licked his scarlet lips, and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. It was as if he was listening to the song of the Asura girl. But he was even more intoxicated. He bowed elegantly toward Li Qingshan in the sky, Attacking the weak really hurts my fighting spirit. I had no choice but to do so. Since you are such a strong person, then I have no more worries. Then you are really worrying too much. Li Qingshan smiled and grabbed a ball of black flames, throwing it casually. Boom! The cliff turned to dust, and the smoke rose into the sky. All of the Asuras on the battlefield were stunned. Another Asura battle god? How did this encirclement suddenly turn into a battle between battle gods? Lord Wisdom King, that is. That is our battle god, Luo Ho Xiaoming ordered. Pass down my orders, gather the army and fight again. Yes, sir. The sound of the war drums shook the earth, and the sound of the bugle horn pierced through the clouds. Li Qingshan stared at the billowing smoke, but his eyes were blank. His gaze seemed to pass through the smoke, past the battlefield, and look at a place far away. He clearly saw the existence of the laws. After going through 6 heavenly tribulations, he was no longer an ordinary cultivator. He had reached an unbelievable realm, and could truly see the laws of heaven and earth. It was as if he had suddenly gained another sensory organ. Although he could not see color, hear sound, or smell, what he saw, heard, and received was 1,000,000 times more information than before. There was no color in the world, but the tremors of light. There was no sound in the world, but the ripples of the air. The things that humans could sense were really too narrow, like the blind and deaf. It was too easy for an ordinary person to defeat a blind person. They didn't even need to be stronger than the blind person. It wasn't just a difference in strength. In reality, the difference was much greater. At least a blind person could roughly understand what seeing meant. If he had been with other blind people since he was young, he wouldn't have been able to imagine how the other person could so accurately grasp his every move and always hit his vital parts. It was as magical and terrifying as if he could predict the future. This was the 7th sense in addition to the 6 senses, the so-called last sense in Buddhism. It was also the first time for Li Qingshan to use this ability in battle. Just now, in that instant, he didn't hit an item with speed or strength, but used the Sky Demon's secret technique to disturb his opponent's last sense. Another reason might be that the power of this punch was too dim, not enough to attract his opponent's attention. In his observation, until now, his opponent's breath hadn't weakened in the slightest. Coming! At this moment, Nidam walked out of the smoke, his body burning with black flames. The speed at which his flesh was regenerating far exceeded the speed at which the black flames were destroying it. He casually extinguished the flames on his body. Chapter 1567. Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan stood in the burning clouds, his face expressionless, but he was very surprised. Even with the power of the apocalyptic fire, he couldn't hurt this guy at all. Nidam. Nidam put his right hand on his chest and bowed slightly. He also gave his name, the corners of his lips curling up. You're very surprised. It seems that you haven't been through the 6th heavenly tribulation for long, and you're not even used to hiding your emotions. Fire is like a weapon. Its power doesn't lie in the weapon itself, but in the person using it. And the so-called apocalyptic fire, of course, can only be unleashed by a god. The fire that the heavenly demon master used to burn down Sanlian City isn't this kind of plaything. Li Qingshan's heart trembled. Under the observation of the nameless consciousness, even his thoughts became almost transparent. In an instant, he rewove his thoughts and built a high wall to block prying eyes. At this moment, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest, and he vomited a mouthful of blood. Nidam stood far away on the horizon, but in his hand was a bloody heart that was still beating. How can you be distracted during a fight? Li Qingshan's body didn't have a trace of injury, but he felt that his chest was empty. That was his heart. When he focused his mind on the inside, he neglected the outside and revealed a flaw. Based on his past experience in fighting with others, this couldn't be considered a flaw at all from such a distance, but he immediately suffered a heavy injury. Nidam's hand directly passed through the void and pierced into his chest, taking out his heart and destroying his other organs. Li Qingshan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. I've learned something. Nidam casually crushed the heart, spread his bloody fingers, and covered Li Qingshan. I'll remove your organs one by one. How long can you last with this temporary Azura immortal body? Then I'll empty your primordial spirit and you'll die. Li Qingshan interrupted impatiently. What are you trying to say? Run. The further the better. It's best if you can escape from the Azura realm. Come back after you've completely adapted to this realm and learned how to fight. Didn't you say that I must die? If you die by my hands, I'm afraid he would rather die in battle than surrender. Needham looked at the ground again. Under Luo Ho Xiaoming's command, the heavily surrounded Wisdom King's army had already regrouped and started to break out of the encirclement. He personally led the army into battle, and for a moment, their momentum was like a rainbow. Facing an enemy 10 times their size, no one could withstand their vanguard. Her eyes were filled with admiration as she said softly, I need him. Li Qingshan's whole body trembled, and he immediately made up his mind. I definitely can't leave classmate Little Ming to this damn gay man. Die! Controlling the flickering black flames, he charged straight at Needham. He raised his 6 arms, and balls of flames condensed into spears. So. In an instant, countless streaks of black light pierced through the air, sealing off all of Needham's escape routes. Needham didn't dodge or evade, allowing a spear of black flames to pierce through his chest. He was actually unscathed. Li Qingshan's eyes widened, and he discovered that Needham's figure was fading in and out of existence. He constantly escaped into the void, shuttling back and forth in the black light, as if he were taking a leisurely stroll. At a glance, it seemed as if he could ignore all damage. Needham wore a mocking expression. He had basically reacted before Li Qingshan attacked. In the midst of the fierce battle, Li Qingshan's state of mind was exposed again. Clearly, he still wasn't used to fighting at this level. Once his attention was divided, he couldn't take care of everything at the same time. In the blink of an eye, Li Qingshan pounced in front of him, his 6 arms wielding 6 spears of black flames, as he struck down with all his might. As expected, Needham's figure disappeared again, and the 6 spears all missed. It's fine if you don't attack. Once you do, you're simply full of openings. Needham appeared again, brushing past Li Qingshan, and casually plucked off one of his arms. Blood splattered everywhere. Feeling Li Qingshan's anger and unwillingness, Needham's heart was as sweet as honey. Li Qingshan's head suddenly turned 180 degrees, and the smile on his face was just as strange. It seemed to be a cold smile, but it was mixed with hypocritical anger and unwillingness, like a twisted mask. A vertical eye suddenly opened on his forehead, shooting out an annihilating divine flame as thick as a finger. However, it was many times faster than the black spears, and in the blink of an eye, it arrived behind Needham, who was completely defenseless. Needham couldn't help but be stunned, but he immediately reacted. His figure disappeared again, and the black divine flame disappeared along with it. This time, a long time passed before he appeared again. At the same time, the black divine flame pierced through his chest. There was no escape. In reality, when Needham entered the void, the black divine flame had already penetrated the void. One was chasing and the other was fleeing, and after going through thousands of twists and turns, it finally hit him. Of course, in the eyes of others, it was just a momentary daze. If one's cultivation was slightly weaker, they might not even realize that he had disappeared, and would only think that he had been hit while defenseless. This time the wound didn't heal. Instead it expanded and spread. Boom, 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 boom. Just now, the black flame spears landed on the ground one after another. Countless plumes of smoke rose into the sky, and for a moment, the battle cries on the battlefield were drowned out. You. Needham turned his head, his expression ferocious and furious. He knew that he had been tricked. Li Qingshan had deliberately exposed his emotions, and at the end, he had faked anger and unwillingness. Taking advantage of the moment when he had relaxed, he had dealt a fatal blow. Has no one ever taught you not to talk so much nonsense when you're fighting with others? Li Qingshan laughed loudly, and extended another arm from where his broken arm had been. At the same time, he extended 6 middle fingers. This is to return the favor. How is this possible? Why are you so skilled? Needham looked at the hole in his chest in disbelief. He couldn't accept it. Just now, He had been fooled like an idiot, but now, he had adapted so quickly to the fighting style of a 6th-level heavenly tribulation. From faking his emotions to deceiving him, to the divine fire's pursuit in the void, and now that he had been seriously injured, it was as if he had become a completely different person. Moreover, he could confirm that Li Qingshan hadn't been deliberately pretending to be stupid at the beginning. Otherwise, he would have directly launched a sneak attack in the tent, and he would have definitely suffered even more. The power of this divine fire of annihilation was too terrifying, and it restrained the undying body of Azura more than he had imagined. TSK, insignificant tricks. I don't need to escape, and I don't need to escape from the Azura path. I can kill you right now. Li Qingshan withdrew his 6 middle fingers. I still have to thank you for your guidance. You made me understand that knowledge is power. Adapting to the 6th-level heavenly tribulation realm was, of course, something that took a lot of time. However, in the colorless realm, Li Qingshan had already reached an even higher realm. This information was stored in Brother Lu Er's trade wind. As long as his strength was sufficient, he could integrate it at any time. The realm itself wasn't power, but it was the foundation of all power. After the great Einstein discovered the theory of relativity, Oppenheimer discovered that, it turned out that he could also make an atomic bomb and use it as a big bomb. In terms of fighting, Li Qingshan had always been able to understand it without a teacher. He realized that the way he used the divine fire of annihilation in the past was really too clumsy. It was practically like using a nuclear bomb to hit someone. At most, it was a dirty bomb. Most importantly, he realized that the thing on his forehead wasn't just a flamethrower, but really an eye. Thus, he was able to lock onto Needham's movements in the void and see the flaw that existed on his body. It wasn't the so-called flaw of being punched in the face, because he didn't defend in time. Instead, it was the flaw at the level of the rules. It was like a stubborn rock with many cracks that were hard to see with the naked eye. It was useless to hack at it with a knife or axe, and at most it would leave some white marks. But as long as he found the crucial crack and struck it lightly with a chisel, the stubborn rock would crack or even shatter. The undying body of Azura was such a stubborn rock. It wasn't perfect and flawless. As long as he found the crucial node, he could seriously damage it, or even cause it to collapse instantly. Of course, normal attacks were completely useless. The node would constantly circulate and change according to the flow of energy and the changes in the movement. The divine eye on Li Qingshan's forehead could see these nodes. But just seeing it was far from enough. Those nodes weren't really points. And the actual situation was much more complicated. Not only did he have to find the cracks on the rock, but he also had to follow these cracks and penetrate the entire rock as quickly as possible. During this process, the cracks were constantly changing. Even the slightest mistake would greatly reduce the effect. Under these circumstances, normal magic treasures and spells were useless. No matter how powerful they were, even if they crushed Needham into powder, they couldn't stop the rebirth of the undying body of Azura. But the divine fire of annihilation had this ability. This was its true terror. In theory, it could destroy everything, and there was no limit to its destructive power. Li Qingshan's 6 hands waved outwards, as if he were chasing a child away. Run! Run as far as you can, although I won't let you go. Chapter 1568. C_T. The setting sun gradually set, the sky was getting dark, and the fierce battle on the battlefield was in full swing. The update was so fast. Millions of Azuras spread out across the vast territory, and it was different from the simple frontal charge that Li Qingshan did in the battle in the demonic domain. The Azuras fought fiercely in every valley, on every hill, and on every field. Some were on high hills, holding longbows, and arrows rained down like rain. Some stood at the forefront of the battle formation, armed and ready, and some freely shuttled back and forth on the battlefield, holding short weapons, appearing and disappearing mysteriously. Even if they were covered with dozens of wounds and broken limbs flying everywhere, they were still fighting fiercely. They were not fighting alone, but cooperated with each other at any time. And the army's spirit was unpredictable. They gathered to attack the enemy, scattered to accumulate momentum, and tried their best to create a situation where they were outnumbered. That was not comparable to the war in any world. Even the old soldiers who had been fighting in the demonic domain for many years could not imagine such a battle. It was like two highly refined war machines, crazily colliding and violently rubbing against each other. There is no constant momentum in war, and water is impermanent, was reflected to the extreme here. And there was a high degree of reason in the fanaticism. Luo Ho Xiaoming took advantage of Nidam's inability to split himself, and dominated the entire battlefield for a time. However, everyone, including him, knew that the key to determining the outcome of the war was not here, but in the sky. He had also been paying attention to the decisive battle in the sky. Even he, who was once a god, could not help but marvel at the speed of Li Qingshan's progress and the talent he showed in the battle. He is simply a born perfect Asura. If he was not born in the human realm, but in the Asura realm, even if he did not meet that person, he would not be much worse than now. Originally, according to common sense, letting a primordial spirit face a war god was simply courting death. Luo Ho Xiaoming still decided to ask him for help, but it was only because of a kind of trust. It was not something boring like feelings or bonds, but the trust of a warrior. In the case of the same realm, Li Qingshan would never be defeated so easily. The multicolored light in the sky dimmed, and the wind blew away all the smoke. In the dark red sky, a bright moon rose up behind Li Qingshan. His black hair draped over his shoulders like the mane of a wild beast. His face was dark and gloomy. His eyes were like burning coals, shining brightly as he gazed over the entire battlefield. Then it condensed on Nidam's body. Only the divine eye on his forehead was tightly shut. He was resting with his eyes closed. Under the gaze of that pair of eyes, Nidam did not dare to make a move. What he was most wary of was that tightly shut divine eye. Seizing the opportunity to catch his breath, he suppressed the world-extinguishing divine fire in his body. The hole in his chest started to heal again. Suddenly, Li Qingshan took a deep breath. The wind whistled and turned into two tornadoes that were sucked into his nostrils. There are almost all the books you want to read. It's much more stable than the average website, and it updates faster. It's all text without advertisements. They surged into the new lungs and propped up the chest. His heart recovered and beat like a war drum, sending blood to his whole body. His strength recovered bit by bit until it reached the most perfect state. Suddenly, he looked up to the sky and roared, his heart filled with excitement. His long hair danced in the wind, and his aura rose rapidly. It was like a burning fire, like a cloud, and filled the entire sky. His aura swallowed thousands of miles like a tiger. The battlefield fell silent. Regardless of friend or foe, everyone looked up. Come on! The murderous intent filled the sky. It condensed into the shape of a tiger and pounced on Nidam. Nidam sneered slightly, and suddenly the void. Li Qingshan focused his eyes and rushed forward. In the void behind him, a hand suddenly stretched out, bringing with it layers of afterimages. If Li Qingshan had not reacted quickly, his heart would have been taken away again. The same trick can't be used on me twice. He turned around, raised the fire, condensed the weapon, and swung the blade, all in one go. 6 blades of divine fire as black as ink slashed at that hand at the same time. But only a series of afterimages were cut. Is that so? It's the same for me. Nidam walked out of the void, dragging with him layers of afterimages. He went against common sense, and suddenly moved forward and retreated, left and right, making it impossible for people to grasp his trajectory. He seemed to be strolling, but he was faster than Li Qingshan. Inch by inch, step by step, he approached Li Qingshan. The two of them, one advancing and one retreating, swept across the battlefield like two meteors connected head to tail, and fell towards a large swamp in the distance. Nidam's hands did not seem to be connected to his arms. They bloomed like lotuses, fluttered like butterflies, and swayed away the net of blades woven by the 6 blades of divine fire. Clanging sounds rang out, and the black flames splashed, but they could not touch him at all. Li Qingshan knew that the difference between their physiques was too big. If they fought in close combat, he had no chance of winning. He would be skinned and torn to pieces by those hands in an instant. Your divine eye, after using it once, needs a long time to recover. You've already used it once just now. If the second time still can't decide the outcome, huh? Nidam looked like he had victory in his hands. Suddenly, he crushed a blade of divine fire and conveniently removed one of Li Qingshan's arms. Boom! The meteor fell into the large swamp. Before the ripples spread out, it was already close to the bottom of the lake, and there was no way to retreat. Shut up, you're not a fucking saint. Li Qingshan shouted angrily. Divine eye open. The world suddenly lost its color, shape, and even quality. It was as if he had returned to the colorless world. All he could see was the wrong laws of heaven and earth. What was constantly approaching in front of him was not an Asura battle god, but a highly condensed and rapidly rotating collection of laws. The so-called cultivators, the so-called gods, were never a special group of people who had jumped out of the three realms and not in the five elements. They were part of the laws of heaven and earth. Whether it was power or life, they all came from this world. The most important thing was that this kind of law itself was also an illusion. The great Tao was invisible. In order for the cultivators to recognize it, and the gods to distinguish it, they named it the 3000 Great Tao. All these titles, all names, and all laws were just a bridge to get close to the Great Tao. Therefore all laws are empty. Li Qingshan sat cross-legged. His 6 arms stretched out to form different seals, and his long hair was tied into a bun behind his head. His eyes reflected the tranquil moonlight and the light of waves, as if he was enlightened before his death. He was full of tenderness to the world, showing the gentle appearance. That was one of the most important 6 Dharma forms in the Mahasvara. It symbolized sacrifice, and was also known as the demonic disintegration. Before Nidam's hands touched his body, the Asura immortal body turned into ashes, leaving only the vertical eye. He placed all his power and all his hope on this divine eye. In an instant, all the afterimages on Nidam's body disappeared. He couldn't help but look up in shock. Although he didn't understand what the Saint Seiya, that Li Qingshan mentioned was, the threat he felt was much greater than the last time. It was as if he fell into an ice cave, as if he was trapped in a land of death. It could actually directly interfere with his movement and eliminate his afterimages with the observation of the doomsday consciousness. Damn it, with this kind of growth speed, what kind of monster did I meet? Destroy, Li Qingshan said in his mind. Then a black gaze was cast toward Nidam. He quickly retreated, and that gaze stared at him. He escaped into the void, but that gaze was still staring at him. As a battle god, he was helpless like a mortal who couldn't escape the gaze of others. That black gaze had already seen through everything. This time, what was left was definitely not just an empty hole. This move is indeed terrifying. It's worthy of being the divine fire of annihilation that burned down Sanlian City. Nidam sighed. Suddenly, he put on a small and exquisite round arm shield, and waved his arm in front of him. Crack! A crack appeared on the mirror-like arm shield. Boom! Before the great swamp could create a ripple, it was instantly evaporated by the divine fire of annihilation. At the bottom of the dry lake, Nidam was unscathed. He looked at Li Qingshan mockingly. It's over. Asura didn't use treasures. They used the most basic weapons and armors, which were the so-called Asura divine weapons. They might not have as many magical functions as treasures. The power often depended on the user. Not only could it not turn a weak person into a strong person instantly, it would often devour the owner. But no one could doubt the destructive power and defensive power of these divine weapons. The small shield in Nidam's hand was the real Asura divine weapon, the weapon of God. As for the annihilation divine flame, it was aimed at Nidam's weak point. Since it was blocked by this divine shield, it didn't have the power to annihilate everything. Li Qingshan was stunned. Damn you, this is too shameless. He couldn't win, so he took the weapon. The divine weapons of Asura are a part of Asura. As Nidam said, he put on a light armor and took out a fist sword. He was fully armed. Li Qingshan didn't need to look to know that this sword and armor were the most powerful divine weapons. And not only was he empty-handed, but he also sacrificed the Asura immortal body and exhausted the power of his primordial spirit. No matter how powerful the divine fire of annihilation was, It was impossible for it to go through the shield and armor to attack Nidam's body. And with a light wave of the fist sword, his primordial spirit was about to be cut in half. Li Qingshan thought, let's talk nicely. Want to escape? It's too late. Otherwise, when we meet again, the one who dies will be me. Nidam was really a little scared by Li Qingshan's abnormal growth speed. That divine fire of annihilation made him feel a lingering fear. If he was hit by that attack just now, the Azura immortal body would probably collapse in an instant. And if Li Qingshan's sight was more accurate and stronger, it might even make him unable to be reborn and completely fall. If I don't get rid of this disaster, I won't be at ease. I hope you won't be reborn. Otherwise, I will have to hunt you down until you die. He waved his fist sword and slashed down fiercely. There were many afterimages, and it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. But it blocked all the way up, down, left, right, in all directions. At this time, Li Qingshan didn't choose to escape. Instead, he took out a wine bag from somewhere and drank a mouthful of wine. Then he took out an ancient bronze sword from somewhere. With a clang, he unsheathed the sword. The two swords clashed, the sword broke. Nidam's eyes widened and his mouth opened wide. He instinctively waved his shield to block. The shield broke. Nidam's expression was like a dream. He looked at the inconspicuous ancient bronze sword falling on his body in a trance. The armor cracked. Li Qingshan's expression was also extremely exaggerated and weird. Just now, he just remembered that he also had a weapon. Although his swordsmanship was a little rusty, he could still deal with it at the critical moment. Who would have thought that this thing could cut through the Azura divine weapon like it was cutting tofu? Blood splattered and Nidam knelt down. His throat made a gurgling sound, and blood gushed up. His life was already cut off. The destructive power of that sword far exceeded the recovery power of the Azura immortal body. Moreover, it wasn't like the divine fire of annihilation that destroyed the key points. It was purely crushing the enemy head-on. What sword is this? Li Qingshan shrugged his shoulders. Who knows? He sighed again. Saddam. Oh Saddam, I told you long ago, don't talk nonsense, don't talk nonsense. Why didn't you listen? You're already called such an unlucky name. Nidam wanted to say that his name was not Saddam, but he spat out a mouthful of blood and fell to the ground. He died with his eyes wide open. Chapter 1569. Li Qingshan was also stunned for a while, then raised his sword high and praised, "Good sword." The moonlight was clear, and the sky was clear. He turned the blade slightly, but the ancient sword still didn't show any sharpness. There was nothing special about it, but it cut 3 divine weapons and killed a battle god. Hey, which great god is that man in the bear skin? Is he Brother Niu's old friend? He prayed to the sky. Thank you for your blessing, great Chief Xiong. Li Qingshan will repay you in the future. At worst, I won't take your position as chief. Then he pounced on Nidam's corpse and stood up shakily. This was a real corpse of a god. Although he couldn't completely fuse with it, he didn't want to start anew. The key was that demon god's body, and this was just for temporary use. Touching the sword wound on his chest, he felt that the sword was even more terrifying. He soared into the sky, swept across the night sky, and arrived at the battlefield. He shouted, "Prince Xiaoming, your boss has been defeated, surrender." At the same time, he sent a message to Luoho Xiaoming. "Your boss, I won." Luoho Xiaoming was shocked at first. He thought that Li Qingshan could fight Nidam to a draw, or at most force him to retreat, which was already his limit. He didn't expect that he would really kill him on the spot. How did he do it? He heaved a sigh of relief and said, "All right, you win." Later, he would definitely get to the bottom of how many tricks this brat was hiding. Li Qingshan smiled. "Follow me, and you won't be disappointed." Yes. Luoho Xiaoming smiled, admiring Li Qingshan's meticulousness. There were a few battle gods in the Azura path. If any outsider could defeat Nidam, it would be eye-catching. If he received the attention of a true god, his bloodline and power would be easily exposed. It seemed very natural for Li Qingshan to substitute for him like this. Wasn't it natural for the Azura battle god to kill a ghost immortal from outside? The only problem was that Nidam would eventually be reborn. and it was inevitable that he would be exposed one day. But now, with every bit of time that was bought, Luo Ho Xiaoming would be able to recover a bit of his strength, which would give him more room to maneuver. Thereupon the two armies stopped fighting and regrouped. This kind of thing could not be more normal in the Azura path. As long as they did not lose their fighting spirit, they would always be able to revive, and there was no deep hatred between them. As for the experts who were originally enemies, they instead appreciated and admired each other. The one who received the most attention was undoubtedly the Wisdom King. A few Azura sovereigns immediately came over to chat with him, expressing their desire to spar and learn from each other. Luo Ho Xiaoming nodded slightly. He didn't say much, and just casually said a few words. Even though he couldn't reveal the power of the Rahu god race, he still had a special aura about him. It made the Azura sovereigns who received his response feel inexplicably overwhelmed by the unexpected favor. Seeing that the time was right, Li Qingshan carried out Needham's last wish and immediately announced that Luo Ho Xiaoming would take the second seat and replace him as the commander of the entire army. Luo Ho Xiaoming sincerely thanked him. Every battle god had his own sphere of influence, which covered countless mountains, rivers, and lakes, and was abnormally vast. He finally had enough space to expand, and no one could suppress him anymore. That was the opportunity for him to go through 6 heavenly tribulations and become a battle god. Li Qingshan was afraid that his identity would be exposed, so he didn't dare to interact too much with Needham's subordinates. He directly announced that a celebration would be hosted by Luo Ho Xiaoming. Relying on some of the remaining memories in this body, he came to the palace on the back of the giant. Deep in the courtyard, Kinara girl, who was in a different place, was still singing sorrowfully. Her voice was weak and ethereal, like a candle in the wind that could be extinguished at any time. Li Qingshan glanced at her. What a waste! He grabbed her body with one hand and the head with the other, putting the two together. Then Kinara girl's singing stopped, and her neck was connected again. She couldn't help but widen her eyes and take a deep breath. She looked Li Qingshan up and down with her beautiful eyes and suddenly said, "You're not Needham." Shocked, Li Qingshan slapped his thigh. So he's not Saddam. No wonder he had that expression when he died, as if he wanted to say something. He simply took off the god's body and hooked Kinara girl's sharp chin. "Beauty, your voice is so beautiful. Tell me more." Kinara girl said, "You're not Azura either." Li Qingshan was really a little curious. "How did you know?" In the eyes of Azura, there wouldn't be so much joy. Li Qingshan laughed heartily. "You're right. This was probably the reason why he didn't want to become Azura. In addition to fighting and killing, there were many other things in life, such as good wine and beautiful women. Looks like you're not Azura either." He looked at her slender and graceful figure under the green gauze, her skin as smooth as milk, and her jade-black eyes with almost no white. In short, there was a faint sadness in them. That wasn't an expression an Azura girl should have. "I'm Princess Qin of the Kinara clan. Thank you for saving my life. If you can send me back to the heavenly law, I'll definitely thank you." "Ah, Kinara?" The 8. Li Qingshan lay down comfortably on the reclining chair. He was getting tipsy, and he pulled Princess Qin into his arms. "Then I won't stand on ceremony." Very soon a soul-stirring, mellow moan rang out in the courtyard. At the same time, in the Hungry Ghost realm, after performing the most meticulous divination, Flowerless Ghost Immortal transformed into a black shadow and silently traveled through the depths of the earth, heading toward Flowerless City, which was thousands of kilometers away. He purposely didn't go out from the main entrance. Although he didn't find the skull prayer beads, the skull prayer beads didn't find him either. This was the caution he had developed over the years, and he sensed that something was amiss. The Hungry Ghost realm was different from the other Daos. There were no true immortals or true gods, and ghost immortals were the strongest. He was infamous in the Hungry Ghost realm, and he could be considered an expert even among ghost immortals. Unless it was the Hell Realm Zine commander, no one else had any reason to provoke him. Even if he was here for revenge, there was no meaning in destroying Wuhua City. Instead, it would expose his hostility. Thus, he kept a low profile, and would rather slow down and retract all of his aura. Very soon, He arrived at Wuxia City and carefully observed for a while before sneaking in. He had gone through 6 heavenly tribulations, understood the laws of heaven and earth, and created the undying consciousness. Even though he was only a ghost immortal, he possessed incredible power. The so-called formation was essentially a fortress constructed by imitating the laws of heaven and earth. In his eyes, it was a fence full of holes, and this was his city in the first place, so he could easily and silently sneak in. Li Qingshan and Little, and were completely unaware that a powerful enemy was approaching. Not only was the heavens not on their side, but they were also blinded by their senses. Even if it was a life-threatening danger, they wouldn't have any premonition. Coincidentally, their primordial spirits were heading toward the Azura realm. Not only was there a major realm between them, but this realm was also the dividing line between cultivators and immortals. They didn't have the right time, the right place, and the right people, and they were being ambushed. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.